Philosophy, Volume 2, by Karl Jaspers. Quotes. Philosophy, Volume 2 by Karl Jaspers deepens his examination of existential philosophy by focusing on existential elucidation, the concept of existence in relation to freedom, communication, historicity, and the conditions of human existence. Jaspers presents a method of philosophical inquiry that encourages individuals to confront and understand themselves in the face of boundary situations, moments of crisis that reveal profound truths about human existence. This volume integrates themes of selfhood, the limits of rationality, and the interplay between freedom and necessity, offering readers a framework to explore the essential structures of human experience in their quest for meaning. Jaspers' work emphasizes philosophy as a personal journey toward self-knowledge and existential clarity, a process that shapes and is shaped by our interactions with others and our awareness of transcendence. Quote 1. Does cognitive thinking stop with world orientation, what we refer to in mythical terms as the soul and God, and in philosophical language as existence and transcendence, is not of this world? Jaspers reflects on the limits of cognitive understanding, questioning whether knowledge of the world is the ultimate scope of human thinking. He introduces concepts such as the soul and God, which he equates with philosophical terms like existence and transcendence. These ideas exist beyond worldly comprehension, suggesting that human experience reaches beyond the material world to something that cannot be fully understood through cognition alone. Existence. Quote 2. Existence appears to itself as existence. Jaspers draws a distinction between mundane existence and existence. Existence is not merely being in the world, but a deeper, more profound awareness of self. This awareness isn't something that can be easily observed or objectified, yet it exists as a lived experience, revealing itself in one's existence without being a tangible object of thought. Quote 3. The possibility of existence is what I live by. It is only in its realization that I am myself. For Jaspers, the concept of existence is not just a theoretical possibility, but something that defines one's true self. It is through the realization of existence that a person becomes who they truly are. This realization isn't automatic or superficial. It requires an active engagement with one's deeper sense of being. Quote 4. Attempts to comprehend it make it vanish, for it is not a psychological subject. Jaspers emphasizes that existence is not something that can be fully understood or captured through psychological analysis. The more one tries to grasp it intellectually, the more elusive it becomes. This suggests that existence is a lived reality that cannot be reduced to mere psychological or cognitive understanding. It transcends these frameworks. Quote 5. I feel more deeply rooted in its possibility than in my self-objectifying grasp of my nature and my character. Jaspers notes that his sense of self is more strongly connected to the possibility of existence than to his objective understanding of his nature or character. This indicates that self-awareness and identity go beyond what can be observed or categorized. They are intimately tied to the potential of existence, which offers a deeper grounding in one's being. Quote 6. My existence differs from other existence in scope. My world can be broad or narrow. But existence differs from other existence in essence because of its freedom. Jaspers emphasizes the distinction between existence, which can vary in its scope and context, and existence, which is fundamentally different due to its inherent freedom. While existence is shaped by external factors and limitations, existence operates on a deeper level, where freedom defines its essence. This freedom enables an individual to transcend the mere conditions of existence and embrace the possibilities that come with it. Quote 7. Existence. Existence is wholly temporal, while existence, in time, is more than time. Here, Jaspers differentiates between the finite nature of existence, which is bound by time, and existence, which, although it occurs within time, transcends it. This suggests that while existence is subject to the limitations of time and space, existence reaches beyond these boundaries, connecting with something eternal and infinite. It hints at a deeper dimension of being that is not confined to temporal existence. Quote 8. The known world is the alien world. I am detached from it. Jaspers points out the alienation experienced in the known, empirical world. Despite being able to understand and navigate the world through cognition, one may feel a deep sense of detachment from it. This alienation stems from the world's impersonal and indifferent nature, which makes it difficult to find a sense of belonging or meaning in the purely objective world. Quote 9. Possible existence thus sets itself off from the world in order to find the right way into the world. Jaspers explains that in order to realize its full potential, existence must first detach from the empirical world. This separation is necessary so that existence can later re-engage with the world in a way that transcends mere existence. The process involves both distancing from and reintegrating with the world, allowing existence to bring meaning and depth to human experience. Quote 10. The union of existence and the world is the incalculable process of which no one who is a part of it can be sure. This quote highlights the complexity and unpredictability of the relationship between existence and the world. Jaspers suggests that the fusion of existence with the world is an uncertain and dynamic process, one that cannot be fully understood or anticipated by those experiencing it. It reflects the open-ended nature of human existence, where meaning and purpose are not predetermined but continuously formed. Quote 11. There is no way to remove our doubts about existence. It is neither knowable as existence nor extant as validity. Jaspers asserts that existence cannot be fully known or verified like empirical existence. It remains elusive and subject to doubt, as it does not exist in the same tangible way as objects in the world. This emphasizes the idea that existence is not something that can be comprehended through traditional means of knowledge, leaving room for doubt and uncertainty in understanding it. Philosophy. Quote 12. Philosophizing begins and ends at a point to which that leap takes me. Existence is the origin of existential philosophizing, not its goal. Jaspers explains that existence is not something to be reached or achieved through philosophy. Rather, it is the starting point from which existential thought emerges. Philosophy seeks to clarify and explore existence, but it does not aim to fully capture or define it. This highlights the open-ended nature of philosophical inquiry into existence. Quote 13. If I reduce all things to mundane existence, either in theory or in practice, I feel unsatisfied. Jaspers conveys that reducing life solely to the material or empirical aspects of existence leads to a deep sense of dissatisfaction. This dissatisfaction stems from the recognition that mundane existence alone cannot fulfill the deeper needs of the self, pointing to the necessity of acknowledging and engaging with existence, which transcends the everyday world. Quote 14. An inexplicable discontent is a step out of mere existence, the step into the solitude of possibility where all mundane existence disappears. This quote suggests that discontent with mundane existence is not just a negative feeling but a critical step toward embracing the possibilities of existence. It involves moving beyond the limitations of the empirical world and entering a space of existential freedom, where one can explore the deeper dimensions of being that are not tied to material existence. Quote 15. Existence is certain that no part of intrinsic being can stay unsettled for it as a phenomenon in temporal existence. Jaspers indicates that existence is committed to addressing and resolving the unsettled aspects of intrinsic being. In the realm of existence, there is a drive toward decision and action, as opposed to allowing things to merely happen. This suggests an active engagement with one's existence, where the individual seeks to take responsibility for their being rather than passively accepting the flow of events. Quote 16. Existence is what I can only be, not see or know. It does require the general medium of lucid knowledge, but whenever the general side tends to become all there is, the individual existence will set itself off again. Jaspers emphasizes that existence is not something that can be fully grasped or objectified through knowledge. It is an aspect of being that can only be lived and experienced rather than observed or comprehended as an external object. While knowledge can provide a framework to approach existence, it cannot encompass it entirely, as existence ultimately asserts its individuality and cannot be reduced to general concepts. Quote 17. What we seek in breaking through mundane existence is an indefinite encounter with possible existence. Jaspers conveys that the aim of existential exploration is to transcend the everyday limitations of existence and reach a more profound encounter with existence. This encounter is not something that can be precisely defined or predicted, as it remains open and undefined, offering possibilities that extend beyond the confines of ordinary existence. Quote 18. The unintelligible existence illuminates itself in the intelligible realm and needs a maximum of intelligibility to become aware of its essential unintelligibility. This quote reflects the paradoxical nature of existence, where it can only become self-aware through the process of engaging with what is intelligible or understandable. Yet, this very engagement reveals the essential mystery or unintelligibility of existence, suggesting that while we can approach it through rational thought, its true nature ultimately remains beyond full comprehension. Quote 19. There is no lasting and definitive objectivity. There are leaps, rather, and there is the phenomenal genesis of existence. Here, Jaspers rejects the idea of a fixed objective reality when it comes to existence. Instead of continuous, predictable development, existence is characterized by moments of sudden change or leaps, where new aspects of being emerge. This suggests that existence is dynamic and evolving, defying the rigid structures of objective understanding. Quote 20. Existence is neither general nor generally valid. Jaspers emphasizes that existence is a deeply individual experience that cannot be generalized or applied universally. Unlike empirical knowledge, which can be shared and validated by others, existence is personal and unique to each individual. It resists the objective standards of validity that apply to other forms of knowledge, highlighting the singular nature of existential experience. Existence, quote 21, as conviction, as faith, as absolute consciousness, cannot be known. Jaspers asserts that existence, when understood as conviction or faith, transcends objective knowledge. It cannot be fully understood or captured by cognitive means. This suggests that existence is not something to be known or proven, but something to be lived and experienced on a personal, subjective level, aligning with deeper aspects of human consciousness. Quote 22. Existence does not claim to be generally valid. It is unconditional being, not transferable being. Jaspers highlights the uniqueness of existence, which does not adhere to general validity. It is unconditional, meaning it exists on its own terms, without needing to conform to universal standards or expectations. Furthermore, it is not transferable from one individual to another, underscoring its deeply personal and non-duplicable nature. Quote 23. In the world of objectivities that can be put into words, I have claims based upon such objectivities. But claims and ratings cease in existential communication. Jaspers explains that while we live in a world of objective measures, where achievements and qualities are used to assess and judge, these standards lose their significance in existential communication. Existence operates outside the realm of claims and external validation, focusing instead on authentic being and mutual understanding between individuals. Quote 24. I myself in communication and historicity. Jaspers highlights the dual role of the self in communication and historical context. The self is not an isolated entity, but exists in relation to others through communication, and is shaped by its historical circumstances. This emphasizes that understanding one's existence involves both interpersonal interactions and an awareness of one's place in history. Quote 25. The critical conscience of possible existence stands, so to speak, between two worlds that look to the mere intellect like one and the same, the appearance of non-entity and the appearance of existence. Jaspers draws attention to the role of conscience in discerning between mere existence and authentic existence. To the intellect, these realms may appear indistinguishable, but the conscience of possible existence can navigate the subtle distinctions. This shows the essential role of inner awareness in understanding and distinguishing the deeper dimensions of being. Quote 26. In natural unconcern, I do not ask about myself. I accomplish the ends that are closest to me, and I think about my tasks. I say I, but it does not trouble me in what sense I am. Jaspers introduces the concept of a state of natural unconcern, where an individual is focused on immediate tasks and goals without questioning their own identity. In this state, the I is used casually, without deeper reflection on what it truly means. This highlights the initial, unreflective way in which people navigate life before being awakened to existential questioning. Quote 27. I turn back to the unreflected original self-awareness that used to fill me, not as a consciousness of something, but as a seemingly real presence. Jaspers reflects on the idea of an original, unreflected self-awareness, which he describes as a state of being where one is simply present without overthinking or analyzing their existence. This state represents a pure, almost instinctual awareness, but as soon as one tries to grasp or explain it, it disappears. This suggests the elusive nature of true self-awareness. Quote 28. The very need to ask about myself shows me that I have departed from the origin. Jaspers points out that the act of questioning one's own existence is evidence of having moved away from an original, untroubled state of being. The need to seek answers about oneself signals a departure from a natural state and initiates the journey toward self-understanding. It underscores the tension between living unconsciously and becoming self-aware. Quote 29. The I is in a subject-object dichotomy of its own, but not in a radical one like the division from things in the world. Jaspers discusses the unique nature of the I, which is both subject and object to itself. This creates a distinct dichotomy, where the self is both the observer and the observed. Yet this division is not as absolute as the division between the self and external objects. It emphasizes the complexity of self-awareness and the inner dialogue that shapes the sense of self. Quote 30. What awakened me was not a mere thought, then, but a jolt in the situation. It shook me in my roots and made me feel that something was decisively up to me. Jaspers describes the existential awakening as something triggered by a significant external event or situation. This moment forces a person to confront their own existence, recognizing that their future actions and choices are now entirely up to them. It is a pivotal shift from passive living to active self-awareness. Quote 31. By questioning it, I have left the darkness of my originality, and the light that seemed to pierce it as a flash of self-awareness fades as soon as I want to see by this light what there is. This quote reflects the elusive nature of self-awareness. Jaspers notes that as soon as one tries to analyze or understand their original sense of self, it fades. The act of questioning moves one away from the natural state of being, making it harder to grasp or sustain that initial sense of self-awareness. Quote 32. I am not what I achieve. I can even come into conflict with it. Jaspers explains that one's achievements do not define the true self. Even though people may identify with their accomplishments, these achievements can become detached from them over time. What one does and who one is are not always aligned, and achievements can sometimes obscure or conflict with the deeper aspects of the self. Quote 33. Although I am in my social I at each moment, I no longer coincide with it. In my social existence, I can now be conscious of a role, so to speak, which I play or put up with. Jaspers recognizes the distinction between the social self, which functions within society's expectations and roles, and the authentic self. Although a person must engage with their social role, they remain aware that it is not their true identity. This awareness allows for an inner resistance to being fully defined by societal expectations. Quote 34. I have no direct way of knowing the sort and the quality of my own being in itself, but I infer that it is what underlies all my phenomena. Jaspers expresses the challenge of knowing the core of one's being. While one can observe aspects of themselves through their actions and experiences, the true essence of being remains hidden. It can only be inferred, as it lies beneath the surface of all that one presents or experiences in the world. Quote 35. Opposed to whatever I have really become, I myself remain a possibility. Opposed to my objectified, enduring substance, I remain myself, and thus free. Jaspers highlights the distinction between what one has concretely become through life experiences and actions, and the enduring sense of oneself as a possibility. This dynamic allows an individual to maintain freedom, even as they accumulate various roles, actions, and identities. The self, as a possibility, is always more than the objectified version shaped by external circumstances. Quote 36. I cannot be myself unless I want to, but to be myself takes more than wanting. I become as I make myself, but if I am myself, I am not self-made. Jaspers emphasizes that while one must desire to be their authentic self, mere wanting is insufficient. Being oneself is an ongoing process of self-making, yet paradoxically, one's essential self is not something they entirely create. This suggests a balance between agency and the given nature of one's existence. Quote 37. Know thyself is not a bid to see what I am in a mirror, but to work on myself so that I shall become who I am. This quote reflects Jaspers' belief that self-knowledge is not merely about passive observation, but requires active engagement and self-creation. To truly know oneself means to consciously shape and realize one's potential, not simply to reflect on one's current state or identity. Quote 38. Self-reflection is not an end, but a means. What matters each time is that, and how I emerge from it, since without it, I could exist only in an immediacy, without possibilities, without mind or self. Jaspers sees self-reflection as a tool for growth, not a goal in itself. It is the process of reflection that leads to a deeper understanding of the self, allowing one to move beyond mere instinctual living and into a realm of greater awareness and potential. Without reflection, one remains stuck in an unexamined, immediate existence. Quote 39. Existence can find itself only in the constant peril of endless reflection, and in the utter dubiousness of all things. Jaspers argues that authentic existence is discovered through continuous reflection and confrontation with uncertainty. This existential questioning is essential for self-awareness, as it pushes one to face the ambiguity and complexity of life. Only by enduring this process can one uncover deeper truths about the self. Quote 40. Objectively, I never know whether or not I come to myself. I appear to myself in time, yet in time I can never wholly be. Jaspers emphasizes the tension between the self's appearance in time and its true nature. While one experiences themselves in the temporal world, this experience is always incomplete. The self is both what it is and what it ought to be, a paradox that leaves one always in a state of becoming rather than fully being. Quote 41. As existens, however, I am in a sense that transcends time. Jaspers distinguishes between empirical existence, which is bound by time, and existens, which transcends time. In this deeper state of being, the self exists beyond the temporal world. This emphasizes the dual nature of existence, the everyday self that changes, and the timeless self that simply is. Quote 42. I discard shells of myself, the ones I judge to be untrue, in order to gain my more profound, my intrinsic, my infinite, my true self. Jaspers describes the process of self-conquest, where one sheds false aspects of their identity to uncover their authentic self. This is a continual process of growth and reflection, where one strives to align with their deeper, truer self, moving beyond superficial identities and motivations. Quote 43. Self-being is the union of two opposites, of standing on my own feet and of yielding to the world and to transcendence. Jaspers explains that true self-being is achieved by balancing independence with openness to the world and transcendence. While the self must stand on its own, it also needs to recognize its limits and connect with something greater than itself. This union of opposites is essential for authentic existence. Quote 44. Without cause, therefore, I am conscious of my existence only in relation to the transcendence without which I slide into the void. Jaspers highlights the importance of transcendence in understanding existence. Without a connection to something beyond the empirical world, the self risks falling into a void of meaninglessness. Transcendence gives weight and significance to finite existence, anchoring the self in a deeper sense of being. Quote 45. I am only in communication with another is a statement that can, of course, be taken to refer objectively and subjectively to our existence, to our connecting links of understanding and of action. And in that case, its meaning is definite and demonstrable in facts of human cohabitation. Jaspers explains that communication between individuals can be understood both objectively and subjectively in terms of social and practical interactions. These interactions form the basis of human coexistence, providing tangible ways to measure how people connect and understand each other in daily life. This highlights the dual nature of communication, which can be both a practical necessity and something more profound. Quote 46. If the words are meant existentially, however, they refer to something that becomes a paradox when we express it, to the origin of self-being, which comes by itself, and yet, in essence, is not of and by itself alone. Here, Jaspers discusses the deeper existential aspect of communication. In this context, communication becomes paradoxical because the self cannot fully exist in isolation. While self-being emerges on its own, it inherently relies on relationships with others to be fully realized. This suggests that individual existence is interdependent with the existence of others. Quote 47. Each mode of community is indispensable to existence, and thus to possible existence in existence. Yet as such, it never amounts to the community I really want as possible existence. Jaspers reflects on the importance of different forms of community for existence, acknowledging that they are essential to life. However, he points out that these forms of community often fall short of the deeper, more meaningful connection that existence seeks. This reveals a gap between ordinary social interactions and the profound existential communion that one desires. Quote 48. Why communicate? Why am I not alone? Jaspers raises fundamental questions about the necessity of communication. These questions point to the inherent human need for connection, which is not easily explained. The act of communication, though seemingly simple, touches on the deeper mysteries of existence and the nature of being with others, suggesting that solitude is insufficient for fully realizing oneself. Quote 49. That existential type is to be sought, rather, at the bounds of observable. Jaspers indicates that the type of communication that resonates with existence is not found within the usual observable forms of community. Instead, it exists at the edges of what can be observed, in the deeper, less tangible aspects of human interaction. This suggests that meaningful existential communication transcends the everyday and enters into something more profound. Quote 50. In man's naive, unquestioning existence in community, his individual consciousness, coincides with the general consciousness of his neighbors. Jaspers explains that in primitive, unreflective community life, individual consciousness merges with the collective consciousness of the group. People follow shared norms and beliefs without questioning their own individual identity, and this shared sense of existence is taken for granted. In such a state, there is no awareness of oneself as distinct from others. Quote 51, "It is a leap when my self-conscious, I becomes capable of confronting others and its world." Jaspers describes the moment when an individual awakens to self-consciousness, gaining independence from the collective. This leap involves distinguishing oneself from others and the world, leading to the development of individuality. It marks a shift from living unconsciously within a community to becoming an aware and independent self. Quote 52. "Existence is original, and its types of communication belong to it alone. Because none but existence itself can experience them, they are invisible in comparison with objective communications." Jaspers suggests that existential communication, which arises from existence, is unique and cannot be fully observed or measured like ordinary forms of communication. This deeper form of connection between selves is invisible and can only be truly experienced by the individuals involved. It transcends typical interactions, existing on a more profound level. Quote 53. "Though communication obviously cannot be achieved simply by the goodwill of the purposive intellect, it is attainable by the commitment of self-being." Jaspers emphasizes that true communication requires more than intellectual agreement or effort. It demands a deeper commitment of one's whole being. Existential communication is not something that can be willed into existence by mere intention. It requires a genuine engagement of the self with the other. Quote 54. "In communication that affects me, the other is this one only. Uniqueness is the phenomenon of the substantiality of this being." Jaspers highlights the singularity of existential communication, where the other person is experienced as unique and irreplaceable. This type of communication is not interchangeable or replicable. It is defined by the absolute individuality of the participants. It underscores the idea that existential relationships are deeply personal and singular. Quote 55. "Solitude is not the same as social isolation. If a primitive lacking a self-consciousness of his own is cast out of his community, for instance, he will either go on living in it inwardly or he will have a dark, desperate sense of not being." Jaspers distinguishes solitude from social isolation by explaining that solitude is a conscious state of self-awareness. A person without self-consciousness, even if removed from their community, may continue to feel connected to it, or may feel lost without a true sense of self. This shows that solitude is tied to individual consciousness rather than mere physical separation from others. Quote 56. "I cannot come to myself without entering into communication, and I cannot enter into communication without being lonely." Jaspers explains that self-awareness and true communication with others are interconnected, and both require a degree of loneliness. One must experience solitude to realize their own self, but it is only through communication that this self can fully develop. Loneliness, then, becomes an essential part of both self-discovery and communication. Quote 57. "If I will not put up with my solitude, if I will not overcome it again and again, I choose either a chaotic ego dissolution or a fixation in forms and tracks without selfhood." Jaspers highlights the importance of continually confronting solitude to avoid losing oneself. If a person refuses to engage with their own solitude, they risk either dissolving their identity in chaos or becoming rigid and stuck in lifeless patterns. This underscores the need for balance between solitude and communication for authentic selfhood. Quote 58. "To be granted a friend, I need the inner tension between the reality of a broad view and the possibility of being in dead earnest." Jaspers notes that true friendship requires a delicate balance between openness and seriousness. It is not enough to simply have a broad perspective. one must also have the capacity for deep, sincere connection. This inner tension allows for the possibility of real communication, which leads to meaningful relationships. Quote 59. Love is not yet communication, but it is its font and its luminary. Jaspers emphasizes that love is the source and guiding light of communication, though it is not the same as communication itself. Love creates the conditions for deep, authentic connection by providing a foundation for the openness and truthfulness that communication requires. Without love, true existential communication would not be possible. Quote 60. When love is realized in unreserved, utterly self-committing communication, it is indestructible. This means keeping faith to the end. Jaspers emphasizes that love becomes truly indestructible only when it is expressed through complete, self-committing communication. This kind of love demands absolute commitment and faith, extending beyond temporary emotions or circumstances. It shows that love, when fully realized in communication, has the power to endure and remain true. Quote 61. A final rupture of communication is the end of love. It shows that the love was a delusion. Where it was real, communication cannot cease, but has to change its form. Jaspers asserts that when communication is irreparably broken, it signifies the end of love. If love was genuine, the communication would not completely end, but would evolve in some way. A rupture in communication indicates that the love was never fully realized, or was perhaps based on illusion, rather than a deep, enduring connection. Quote 62. In temporal existence, communication is the love-filled motion that seems aimed at unity, but would have to cease in its attainment. Jaspers describes communication in the temporal world as a dynamic process fueled by love, constantly moving toward unity, but never fully achieving it. This ongoing motion prevents love from becoming stagnant or reaching a point of finality, reflecting the tension between the desire for unity and the reality of continual separation. Quote 63. There is something peculiarly active about silence, and as such it becomes a function of communication itself. Jaspers explains that silence, far from being mere inaction, can be an active component of communication. In certain moments, silence expresses readiness, presence, and depth in ways that words cannot. This active silence is part of true communication, reflecting a deeper understanding between individuals beyond verbal exchange. Quote 64. Pliancy, however, entails a violation of dignity. At turning points, indignity is an unavoidable experience. Jaspers reflects on the necessity of pliability or flexibility in existential communication, even though it may cause a person to feel undignified. In moments of profound self-realization or communication, individuals must risk their dignity to grow or connect deeply. This process of overcoming indignity leads to greater self-understanding and transformation. Quote 65. Or I get back into a solitary situation when all those I used to communicate with have died, when I alone remain. The world in which a man will go on living, then, is no longer his world. Jaspers reflects on the solitude that arises when a person outlives those with whom they once communicated. In this situation, the familiar world is no longer the same, and the individual becomes disconnected from it. This loneliness carries a sorrowful, reflective quality, yet it also opens the possibility of transcendence, where one finds solace beyond the temporal world. Quote 66. To communicate is to become oneself with another, and a rupture of communication is the original jeopardy of a failing existence. Jaspers emphasizes that true selfhood is achieved through communication with others. When communication breaks down, it threatens one's very sense of existence. A rupture in communication is not just a relational issue, but an existential crisis, where the failure to connect with another jeopardizes the self's ability to realize its potential. Quote 67. For fear of uncovering myself in communication, I lapse into total reserve. I become my own victim, evading my obligation to be free, succumbing to the way I am, and shutting my eyes to both. Jaspers highlights how fear of vulnerability can lead a person to retreat from communication, enclosing themselves in self-reserve. This retreat is not a liberation, but a self-imposed imprisonment, where the individual avoids both self-realization and authentic connection with others, becoming trapped in their own limitations. Quote 68. The hidden core of this fear is the force of self-existence, the opaque, autocratic, unreasoning, and uncommunicative will to be the way I am. Jaspers identifies the root of fear in communication as a stubborn attachment to one's existing state of being. This self-existence is characterized by an unwillingness to change or communicate authentically, driven by a blind determination to remain as one is. It creates an obstacle to deeper connection and existential growth. Quote 69. In the struggle for existence, I am essentially what I rate, with others and with myself. Jaspers explains that in the struggle to survive and assert oneself, a person's value is often determined by comparison to others and to their own expectations. This comparison, based on external achievements or status, shapes how individuals perceive themselves, though it ultimately conflicts with the deeper, unique nature of existence. Quote 70. The stubborn pride of one who wants to be nothing but himself leads him to decline communication. He would like to identify the world with himself and knows only one purpose: to possess the world. Jaspers explains that a person who is fixated on being self-sufficient often refuses to engage in meaningful communication. This person desires to dominate the world and others, treating relationships not as opportunities for connection, but as ways to assert control. The refusal to reveal vulnerability prevents true solidarity or understanding, making genuine communication impossible. Quote 71. Existence alone can use true communication to break out of this polarity, out of the uncommunicative relations of an ever-lonely self without self-understanding. Jaspers suggests that only through existence, authentic being, can individuals break free from the isolating dynamic of power struggles. True communication allows one to transcend these uncommunicative, solitary states and connect meaningfully with others. It offers a way out of the loneliness caused by superficial, hierarchical relationships. Quote 72. The rank of existence, on the other hand, would never be capable of realization, and it could never be known either in general or in a particular case. Jaspers reflects on the idea that the true rank or value of an individual's existence cannot be measured or fully understood. Unlike social hierarchies based on external accomplishments or status, the depth and significance of one's existence remain hidden and incommunicable. It is an inner reality that resists comparison or objectification. Quote 73. Sociality is the medium of innumerable non-committal contacts, and in those, now and then, the moment will come when a situation or a colloquy essentially decides on a relationship that has thus far been unessential. Jaspers points out that most social interactions are casual and non-committal, but within this context, there are moments when a conversation or event transforms a relationship into something significant. These rare moments determine whether a connection will evolve into something deeper, highlighting the unpredictability of existential encounters. Quote 74. Existential communication occurs in a sphere which no society can reach, in a sphere in which social forms are relativized and thus overcome. Jaspers emphasizes that existential communication exists beyond the constraints of social norms and structures. While social forms govern everyday interactions, true communication transcends these limitations, allowing individuals to connect on a deeper level, where societal roles and conventions no longer hold sway. Quote 75. Everyone's worth is mutual, not what he himself is worth. There is no reverence, no love, only the form of ordered, objective relations of power and rank. Jaspers points out that in a world dominated by objective structures of power and rank, individuals are valued only in relation to others, not for their intrinsic worth. This leads to a lack of reverence and love, with human relationships reduced to impersonal, hierarchical exchanges. Such an environment fosters mutual deception, where true self-worth is overshadowed by societal measures of success. Quote 76. When an individual makes an absolute of political intercourse, it is a sign of existential instability. Jaspers explains that those who focus solely on political interaction, viewing it as the ultimate form of engagement, reveal an existential instability. This emphasis on political maneuvering, where power and influence take precedence, leads to superficial connections and alliances that lack true existential depth. It also indicates a failure to seek meaningful communication and self-understanding. Quote 77. To have the will to be myself in communicative manifestation, I must be suffering under the perpetual insufficiency of communication. Jaspers reflects on the paradox that drives existential communication. In order to truly be oneself, one must feel the inadequacy of communication. This perpetual insufficiency propels the individual to continue seeking deeper, more authentic ways of expressing and realizing their selfhood. Without this sense of insufficiency, there would be no motivation to engage in the process of existential communication. Quote 78. If I know in advance that all will be well in the end, I need only ascertain the end. It is not up to me. Jaspers explains that if one believes in a predetermined outcome where everything ends well, there is no need for active engagement or personal responsibility in shaping one's life. This certainty eliminates the need for existential struggle, leaving no space for authentic communication or the unfolding of one's true self. Existential growth depends on the unknown and the effort to realize one's own potential. Quote 79. There can be no absolute objective truth, and all objectivity must instead become relative. Jaspers argues that truth is not something that can be universally fixed or fully objective. Rather, all objectivity is relative, shaped by the context and the individuals involved. Philosophical truth arises from existential communication and is deeply personal, making it impossible to pin down as an absolute, universal reality. Quote 80. What we call a sense of history is knowledge of history, but not simply a knowledge of what happened, as things will always be happening everywhere. Jaspers distinguishes the sense of history from mere factual knowledge of past events. A true sense of history involves understanding events as something more than just occurrences. They are singular, unique, and foundational to our present existence. This sense transcends the objective facts of history and connects us with the deeper significance of what has been. Quote 81. Our sense of history leaves us, who know and explore it, still always only vis-a-vis the events, contemplating them and inquiring into their causes. Jaspers explains that the sense of history often remains at a distance from the events themselves. Even as we analyze and explore historical causes, we are separated from the actual experiences, unable to fully engage with the lived realities of the past. This gap leaves us as observers, not participants, in history. Quote 82. Something quite different is the existential historic consciousness proper, in which the self becomes aware of its historicity as the only possible form of its reality. Jaspers introduces the concept of existential historic consciousness, which is more profound than mere historical knowledge. It is the awareness that the self's reality is inseparable from its historicity, meaning that the individual's existence is shaped and defined by historical context. This recognition deepens one's understanding of personal and collective identity. Quote 83. Historicity is not just being in history, but being aware of one's place within it, realizing that I am part of a continuous, unfolding process. Jaspers emphasizes that historicity goes beyond simply existing in time. It involves a conscious realization of one's role within the larger historical process, acknowledging that each individual contributes to and is shaped by the ongoing flow of history. This awareness adds depth to how one experiences and interprets life. Quote 84. In this knowledge, I am not myself as an individual. I am consciousness at large, a knowing subject, apart from the object I know. Jaspers reflects on the detachment that often characterizes historical knowledge. When engaging with history, one can adopt a more impersonal, objective stance, becoming a generalized consciousness rather than an individual who is personally involved in the events. This perspective distances the self from the historical reality being examined. Quote 85. Historicity is the one mode of access I have to absolute being. Jaspers suggests that it is through historicity, one's awareness of being in time and part of a historical process, that individuals can approach the idea of absolute being. This realization comes not from abstract thought, but through lived, temporal existence. The connection between historicity and absolute being is experienced, not fully understood, as one navigates their historical context. Quote 86. I myself am not temporal. I know myself only as existence in time, but in such a way that this existence becomes to me the phenomenon of my timeless self-being. Jaspers reflects on the paradox of human existence. While individuals live in time, their true self, existence, is not fully defined by temporal limits. Human consciousness operates within time, but also carries a sense of timelessness, where the self transcends its historical moment to grasp a deeper, more enduring reality. Quote 87. In existence only that I come to be sure of myself, and thus of transcendence. Jaspers asserts that it is through existing in the world, engaging with situations and challenges, that individuals come to understand both themselves and the concept of transcendence. This understanding does not arise in isolation or abstract thought, but through lived experience, where the self is revealed and connected to something beyond. Quote 88. Without knowledge, that is, without lucid comprehension and involvement, there is no historic being, and without historic reality, there is no knowledge. Jaspers emphasizes the inseparable link between knowledge and historicity. True knowledge is not possible without active engagement with history and one's place within it. Similarly, history itself has no meaning without the presence of conscious beings who comprehend and interpret it. This mutual dependence shows that history and knowledge are intertwined. Quote 89. A sense of historicity can simultaneously lend absolute weight to existence, as grasped by self-being, and keep it in suspension and relative, as mere existence. Jaspers describes how historicity allows individuals to perceive their existence as both deeply meaningful and yet, before transcendence, relative and insignificant. This tension between the importance of individual existence and its ultimate insignificance in the face of transcendence creates a duality that defines the human experience of historicity. Quote 90. In this temporal existence, I am possible existens, a being which confronts my temporal existence if it merely exists, and which is identical with that existence if it becomes the phenomenon of my selfhood. Jaspers explains that in temporal existence, an individual possesses the potential to realize their existence, the deeper dimension of being. If one lives superficially, existence remains a separate possibility. But when selfhood is actualized through conscious living, existence and temporal existence become one. This unity reflects a fulfilled self-awareness. Quote 91. To remain true, unconditionality must concentrate on the concrete historic present. Jaspers suggests that true authenticity is achieved by engaging fully with the present moment in its historical context. Unconditional truth cannot be found in abstract, timeless ideals, but must be rooted in the concrete reality of the present. It is through this focus on the historic present that one finds true meaning. Quote 92. Existence cannot directly appear in existence. Without the resistance of matter, it could no more realize itself than a bird could fly in empty space. Jaspers illustrates that existence, or authentic being, requires the challenges and limitations of existence to manifest itself. Just as a bird needs air to fly, existence needs the material world's resistance to realize its potential. It is through navigating life's constraints that one can bring their deeper self into being. Quote 93. The moment, as a mere particle of temporality, is in flux. Objectively imagined, it is nothing, evanescence itself. Jaspers reflects on the fleeting nature of time, noting that when a moment is viewed purely as a point in time, it is transitory and lacks substance. This view reduces the moment to something that disappears quickly. However, when connected to existence, the moment gains significance as part of a larger, continuous process. Quote 94. The risk which any existence must run is to take hold in time without knowing where the road leads and where success really lies. Jaspers emphasizes the existential risk involved in living authentically. Existence requires the courage to engage with life's uncertainties, making decisions without full knowledge of their outcomes. This willingness to act in the face of uncertainty is a defining feature of existence, which thrives on the unpredictability of life. Quote 95. If the historicity of existence is not universal, we say it is irrational. The term is not inaccurate, but it is misleading. Irrationality is purely negative. Jaspers clarifies that labeling the historicity of existence as irrational is misleading, as irrationality is typically understood as something negative. Historicity, however, is a positive carrier of existence and cannot be reduced to simple irrationality. It is more than the absence of reason. It is a unique, singular source of meaning. Quote 96. Historicity means to have roots in the singular situation of my existence, and in the particularity of my task, which lies here and now, even if it appears to my mind in the form of a general task. Jaspers explains that historicity involves being deeply connected to the specific circumstances and tasks that define an individual's existence. While these tasks may seem general, they are rooted in one's personal, historical context, making them unique. Historicity is realized in the specificity of one's actions and decisions in the present moment. Quote 97. One unconditional entirety for all would mean that there can be a final goal, either as an end in temporal existence or, if we double the world, as another world in the beyond. Jaspers critiques the idea of a single, final goal that applies to everyone. Such a concept would imply an absolute universal truth that either completes existence in time or promises another existence beyond this world. However, for existence, there is no such finality. Historicity resists being subsumed under a universal, final purpose. Quote 98. In seeking to fathom where I come from, I ask metaphysically where the world comes from. Jaspers connects the individual's search for self-understanding with the larger metaphysical question of the origin of the world. These two inquiries are intertwined, as the search for personal meaning inevitably leads to questions about the nature of existence itself. This metaphysical exploration is a natural extension of the historicity of existence. Quote 99. To extend historicity to all reality means that all there is, and as it is, comes from decisions. It is not eternal and timeless in an absolute world. Jaspers suggests that historicity, when applied to all of reality, indicates that everything stems from decisions rather than existing eternally and timelessly. Even natural laws and general truths, which may seem timeless, are ultimately tied to temporal and historical conditions. This view places human decision-making at the core of existence, challenging the notion of a static, absolute world. Quote 100. The historicity of existence is its fidelity, but not in the sense of observing mere external bonds. Jaspers defines the fidelity of existence as a deeper commitment to one's historic existence, beyond merely fulfilling external obligations. True fidelity involves staying true to one's origin and personal history, maintaining a meaningful connection to the past. This fidelity is not about rigid adherence to roles or rules, but about an inner, substantial loyalty to the self and its unfolding in time. Quote 101. In infidelity, I can detach myself and go off endlessly, so to speak, into a bottomless void. Jaspers warns that infidelity, in the existential sense, leads to a loss of self. When one becomes disconnected from their roots and historicity, they risk falling into a void of meaninglessness, where nothing truly matters. This detachment from one's historicity results in a lack of grounding, which ultimately erodes personal identity and purpose. Quote 102. There is no fidelity toward anything general and timeless. Jaspers emphasizes that fidelity cannot be directed toward abstract, timeless ideals. True fidelity is always connected to the concrete, the specific, and the historical. This highlights the existential belief that meaning is found in particularities rather than universal or eternal concepts. Fidelity must be rooted in the lived experience of one's historic existence. Quote 103. Fidelity presupposes a reserve that keeps me from frittering myself away, a caution that makes me proceed step by step. Jaspers points out that fidelity requires a certain degree of restraint and carefulness. Rather than scattering one's energies on superficial pursuits, true fidelity involves a deliberate, measured engagement with life. This cautious approach ensures that one's actions align with their deeper commitments, preserving their sense of self and history. Quote 104. Historicity. The solidification of knowledge and of authority is a flight from the phenomenal proximity of historic existence. Jaspers explains that when individuals seek stability in knowledge or authority, they distance themselves from the true experience of historic existence. This solidification represents an attempt to escape the tension and uncertainty inherent in being, favoring static truths over the dynamic process of existence. Such a flight undermines the authentic engagement with existence and leads to a more mechanical view of life. Quote 105. If I seek solidity in knowing what is generally necessary, the unsubstantiality of this knowledge may drive me to despair. Jaspers highlights the potential emptiness of relying on general knowledge for certainty. When one looks for solid truths in abstract principles, they may find them unsatisfying and inadequate to address the deeper existential questions of life. This can lead to despair, as general knowledge fails to provide the substantial meaning that one seeks in existence. Quote 106. Self-being without existence can only say no until nothing but the very act of negation remains. I have become as nothing. Jaspers warns that pursuing self-being without engaging in real existence leads to a state of constant negation. Without existence to ground it, the self becomes disconnected and loses meaning, reducing itself to mere negativity. This detachment from existence results in a hollow sense of being where nothing is affirmed, and the self is left empty. Quote 107. Man cannot deify himself, least of all when he takes himself so seriously that nothing of all that he can meet in the world means more to him than he himself. Jaspers argues that self-deification, or placing oneself above all else, is a fundamental misunderstanding of human existence. When a person elevates themselves to the highest importance, disregarding everything else, they lose touch with the true nature of existence. Such self-deification leads to isolation and disconnection from the larger realities of life and transcendence. Quote 108. Confronting both objectifications is the genuine sense of historicity. Its fundamental attitude is not just to recognize those with whom I enter into communication, but to be concerned with them. Jaspers asserts that true historicity involves more than just acknowledging others. It requires genuine concern for them. This relational aspect of historicity emphasizes communication and mutual engagement, where individuals care for each other as unique beings. Through this concern, existence is realized not in isolation, but through meaningful connections with others. Quote 109. Self-being as freedom means living in a state where I affirm myself in the process of becoming free, through the decisions I make and the actions I take. Jaspers suggests that self-being and freedom are intertwined, with freedom manifesting in the process of becoming through active decision-making. The self is not a fixed entity, but evolves through the choices one makes, affirming its existence by engaging with the world and taking responsibility for those choices. This creates a dynamic understanding of self-being rooted in freedom. Quote 110. In the depths of historicity, freedom does not mean indifference to existence, but engagement with the world in a way that makes one's self-being realized. Jaspers explains that true freedom within historicity does not mean detachment from life, but rather a deep engagement with it. Freedom is realized when individuals actively involve themselves in the world, making choices that reveal their authentic self-being. This engagement with existence shapes the individual's reality and helps them to actualize their potential. Quote 111. Without historical consciousness, my freedom would remain abstract, unanchored to the concrete realities of my existence. Jaspers asserts that historical consciousness is essential for grounding freedom in reality. Without an awareness of one's historical context, freedom becomes an abstract concept, disconnected from the concrete circumstances that shape existence. It is through understanding one's place in history that freedom can be fully realized in a meaningful and impactful way. Quote 112. Fidelity in historicity involves not just remaining faithful to the past, but actively transforming it in the present through decisions that shape the future. Jaspers views fidelity in historicity as an active process. Being faithful to one's history is not about passive adherence to tradition, but involves consciously shaping the present by making decisions that influence the future. This dynamic approach to fidelity means engaging with history to create new possibilities and outcomes rather than merely preserving the past. Quote 113. The self is neither static nor self-contained, but always in the process of becoming through its relationship to transcendence and the world around it. Jaspers describes the self as a fluid and evolving entity, continuously shaped by its relationship to transcendence and the world. The self is not a finished product, but is constantly being formed through experiences, decisions, and interactions. This ongoing process of becoming is central to the understanding of self-being in Jaspers' philosophy. Quote 114. Freedom exists as volition. The will is not just the forward-driving activity. Its freedom is that at the same time, it wills itself. Jaspers emphasizes that freedom is manifested through the act of volition, or willing. However, true freedom goes beyond merely wanting or striving for something. It includes the capacity for the will to reflect on itself and choose to affirm its own direction. This self-reflective aspect of the will defines freedom as not just an outward activity, but an inward affirmation of one's ability to will. Quote 115. The freedom in my volition has split then, in a dubious ambiguity of acting against myself and vacillating. Which am I? The man who did this because he seemed to himself to will it? Or the man who at that silent moment did not will it? Jaspers explores the inner conflict that arises when a person's actions seem to contradict their true will. This ambiguity reflects a struggle between different parts of the self. The one who appears to will an action, and the one who, deep down, does not. This tension creates uncertainty about one's true desires and identity, highlighting the complexity of human freedom and decision-making. Quote 116. I can say, helplessly, that I can't will anything. Then I myself am not there. Enmeshed in the possibilities of endless reflection, I do not come to the resolution that is really me when I will my willing. Jaspers points to the paralysis that can result from overthinking or excessive self-reflection. When a person is caught in endless possibilities and cannot commit to a decision, they lose their sense of self. True will involves the ability to resolve this internal conflict and act decisively, affirming one's own existence through the act of willing. Quote 117. The will that wills itself is not the one that wills something. Jaspers makes a distinction between two types of will, one that is directed toward external goals and another that reflects on its own process of willing. The will that wills itself is a deeper form of volition, rooted in the affirmation of one's own being and freedom, rather than merely seeking to achieve specific outcomes in the external world. Quote 118. The will that wills something can be described as a psychological phenomenon. The will that wills itself is the active assurance of being which my volition of something derives from the ground of freedom. Jaspers clarifies that the will directed toward external objects is a psychological process, while the will that reflects on its own capacity is a deeper existential act. This self-willing affirms one's freedom and existence, grounding all external volition in the fundamental experience of being. It's a distinction between surface-level desires and a profound engagement with one's own freedom. Quote 119. I can say of something that at the same time it is and is not my will. The freedom in my volition has split, then, in a dubious ambiguity of acting against myself and vacillating. Which am I? The man who did this because he seemed to himself to will it? Or the man who at that silent moment did not will it? Jaspers examines the inner conflict that occurs when one's actions appear to contradict their will. This ambiguity causes the individual to question which version of themselves is true, the one who outwardly acted or the one who internally did not fully will the action. This highlights the complexity of human freedom and the tension between external actions and internal desires. Quote 120. The will rests upon the freedom that puts it into a state of suspension, the state from which the same freedom brings it to a resolution. Jaspers explains that the will's freedom involves a moment of suspension, where decisions are not yet made. It is from this suspended state that true freedom arises, allowing the will to bring about resolution. This process reflects the dynamic nature of freedom, where the will must navigate uncertainty before making a definitive choice. Quote 121. My will is no mere sense of reactivity or striving insistence, nor is it the pragmatically indifferent visualization of an objective content. It is the union of both, rather, the lucidity of the goal at which my striving aims. Jaspers argues that the will is not simply reactive or passively directed toward a goal. Instead, it unites both striving and clear purpose. True volition involves not just instinctual reactions, but a conscious awareness of the goal and the means to achieve it, making it an active, deliberate process. Quote 122. There is such a thing as the struggle of motivating forces in which one comes to prevail, without a real choice, but we do not speak of volition until there is a clear I choose. Jaspers distinguishes between automatic, instinctual responses and true volition. A choice is only real when it involves a conscious decision, where the individual actively chooses between alternatives. This separates volition from the mere victory of one internal force over another, as true will requires conscious engagement and reflection. Quote 123. The will that wills itself is the active assurance of being which my volition of something derives from the ground of freedom. Jaspers emphasizes that the will that reflects on itself is the foundation of freedom. This self-willing is not just about pursuing external goals, but is an affirmation of one's own existence and freedom. The will derives its power and purpose from this deeper assurance of being, making it more than just a tool for achieving external objectives. Quote 124. What is historically true becomes untrue when I seek it. Jaspers asserts that historical truths lose their authenticity when individuals attempt to consciously seek or recreate them. This highlights the difficulty of capturing the true essence of historical moments, as the act of seeking them alters their original nature. Historic truth must be experienced rather than pursued in a calculated way. Quote 125. Freedom is not in existence, and since the supposedly generally valid and demonstrable statements to affirm or deny it would nonetheless objectify its being, they cannot but pervert its meaning. Jaspers explains that freedom does not exist as an objective, tangible thing in the world. Attempts to prove or disprove the existence of freedom using objective arguments only distort its true meaning. Freedom is an existential concept that transcends the limits of objectivity and cannot be fully captured through rational analysis. Quote 126. Freedom proper is independent of the affirmation or denial of that freedom. Jaspers emphasizes that true freedom exists beyond any external validation or refutation. Whether people claim that freedom exists or does not exist, it remains unaffected. This suggests that freedom is an inherent aspect of human existence that does not depend on external recognition or argument. Quote 127. The bounds of the first type of freedom coincide with those of the domain of my will. The second is restricted by the fear of threatened force, by premiums on specific actions, by fatigue, low spirits, and by the pressure of time. Jaspers highlights the limitations placed on freedom in daily life. While some freedom exists within the realm of individual will, it is constantly constrained by external factors such as fear, societal pressures, and personal limitations. This view reveals how freedom is often bounded by both internal and external forces. Quote 128. Freedom is neither demonstrable nor refutable. Jaspers argues that freedom cannot be definitively proven or disproven. It exists outside the realm of objective proof and remains a fundamental aspect of existential experience. This assertion underscores the idea that freedom, like many existential concepts, defies simple rationalization or empirical verification. Quote 129. The will alone can be evil. Jaspers asserts that evil is not found in external conditions, physical realities, or abstract ideals. Instead, it resides in the will itself, which can consciously choose destruction or negation. Evil arises when the will turns against the potential for existence, actively choosing to deny or ruin being. Quote 130. Good and evil are thus not definable by substance. All substantial possibilities lie in both. Jaspers emphasizes that good and evil are not inherent in specific actions or objects. Both good and evil can emerge from the same possibilities, depending on how the will chooses to act. It is the will's orientation toward life or destruction that defines whether something becomes good or evil. Quote 131. Evil is existence that wills itself, that makes itself absolute, and turns upon its own existential possibility. Jaspers describes evil as the will's act of making existence its only goal, rejecting the deeper possibilities of existence. By focusing only on its own existence and disregarding transcendence, the will becomes destructive. This absolute fixation on existence leads to the negation of greater potential and results in evil. Quote 132. Evil puts itself in the shackles of self-existence and says, yes. Jaspers explains that evil, in affirming its focus on self-existence, willingly imprisons itself. By saying yes to this limited form of being, evil chooses confinement and rejects the broader, more meaningful freedom of existence. This self-imposed limitation ultimately leads to destruction. Quote 133. We cannot eradicate evil, and we can be good, only in struggling with evil. Jaspers acknowledges that evil is a constant force in existence that cannot be entirely eliminated. However, goodness emerges through the continual struggle against evil. It is in facing and resisting evil that individuals manifest goodwill and maintain their commitment to existence. This struggle is an ongoing process, without final resolution. Quote 134. What makes freedom possible for me is that I myself do not become an object. The question of its being originates in me. I will its being. Jaspers emphasizes that freedom is made possible by the fact that the self remains a subject, not an object. The inquiry into freedom comes from within, as it is a question tied to the individual's will to be free. It is not something external that can be discovered or proven objectively, but must be willed from within. Quote 135. I am asking whether and how I take hold of myself, or let myself go. I am not looking about me to see whether freedom might occur, perhaps, somewhere in the world. Jaspers explains that the true question of freedom is about self-determination, not about finding freedom in the external world. It is a personal, internal matter of whether one can seize control of their own being or allow it to slip away. This inquiry is deeply connected to the individual's sense of responsibility for their actions. Quote 136. I demand my selfhood by making demands on myself. To be myself, I must be able to meet my demands. Jaspers highlights that freedom is closely tied to selfhood. By making demands on oneself, an individual asserts their freedom and identity. The ability to meet these demands is essential to being truly oneself, as selfhood is not given, but created through the exercise of freedom and responsibility. Quote 137. Freedom is the alpha and omega of existential elucidation. It speaks there and there alone, not in world orientation and not in transcendence. Jaspers asserts that freedom is the central concept in existential philosophy. It is found in the realm of existence, the lived experience of the individual, rather than in the objective world or in transcendent, metaphysical realms. Freedom is the starting and ending point of understanding human existence. Quote 138. Without this possibility of being free myself, I cannot ask about freedom. Hence, there is either no freedom at all, or it is in asking about it. Jaspers explains that the very act of questioning freedom implies that one already possesses the potential for it. If an individual cannot conceive of their own possibility of being free, then the concept of freedom becomes meaningless. Therefore, freedom either does not exist at all, or is revealed in the act of asking about it, as the question itself reflects an inherent will to be free. Quote 139. Freedom is proved by my actions, not by my insight. My concern with its being includes the activity I realize it in. Jaspers asserts that freedom is not something that can be proven intellectually or through theoretical insight. Instead, it is demonstrated through actions. The existence of freedom is verified in the decisions and actions an individual takes, meaning that freedom is something lived and realized, not just understood. Quote 140. To be myself, I must be able to meet my demands. Jaspers connects freedom to selfhood by stating that in order to truly be oneself, an individual must meet the demands they place upon themselves. This suggests that freedom involves not only the ability to act, but also the capacity to hold oneself accountable to personal standards and expectations, thus creating a sense of authentic selfhood. Quote 141. Freedom does have a tendency to render itself superfluous. As the ultimate phenomenon of temporally existing existence, it seeks to void itself in transcendence. Jaspers notes the paradox of freedom, where it seeks to go beyond itself into transcendence. As the highest form of existential being, freedom naturally desires to transcend temporal limitations, but in doing so, it risks negating its own existence. This reflects the tension between freedom as an existential state and the pull toward transcendence. Quote 142. In this choice, I resolve to be myself in existence. Jaspers highlights that existential freedom culminates in the conscious resolution to embrace one's true self. This choice is not merely a practical decision, but a deep personal commitment to live authentically. The act of choosing oneself is an affirmation of freedom, as it expresses an individual's commitment to their own being in the world. Quote 143. Freedom is not absolute. It is always bound at the same time. I do not have it. I gain it. Jaspers explains that freedom is not something one inherently possesses in an absolute sense. Instead, freedom is something that must be actively gained and maintained through one's actions and decisions. It is a continuous process rather than a fixed state, and it is always accompanied by limitations and constraints. Quote 144. If I say I choose, and my sense of decision covers freedom proper, it still does not lie in arbitrary choice, but in the necessity I mean when I say I will, in the sense of I must. Jaspers clarifies that true freedom is not about making arbitrary choices, but involves a deeper necessity. When one exercises free will, it is not just about choosing randomly. It is about recognizing the inner necessity and responsibility that compels one to act. This understanding of freedom intertwines choice with duty and self-being. Quote 145. The question of freedom for what seems all the more urgent. If I do not know what I want, I am helpless in the face of endless possibilities. I feel I am nothing. Jaspers emphasizes the importance of having a clear sense of purpose in exercising freedom. Without knowing what one truly desires, the multitude of choices available can lead to a sense of paralysis or emptiness. Freedom, then, is not just about having options, but about knowing what to do with those options in a meaningful way. Quote 146. An absolute beginning would be one the question of whose cause could be answered, without going beyond it. It would be the causa sui. Jaspers reflects on the concept of an absolute beginning, or causa sui, which refers to something that is the cause of itself. This idea challenges the endless chain of causality, suggesting a point at which questions about causes would stop. However, Jaspers points out that this concept remains problematic, as it is difficult to imagine such a beginning in empirical reality. Quote 147. Not knowing is the root of having to will. Jaspers highlights that the human experience of not knowing, particularly regarding the nature of being and transcendence, is what compels the will to act. This uncertainty is the driving force behind the need for volition, as individuals must navigate the unknown through their choices and actions, which are expressions of freedom. Quote 148. Freedom, although based upon an absolute, is relative in the world. The free man always confronts something that is given by nature and means to him dependency or resistance, impulse or material. Jaspers explains that while freedom is grounded in an absolute principle, it manifests in a relative way in the world. In practical existence, individuals are always faced with natural constraints, whether they are physical, emotional, or situational. Freedom is realized in the tension between these constraints and the individual's capacity to choose and act. Quote 149. An absolute freedom would be that of a totality without anything left outside it, a totality synthesizing all antitheses. Jaspers describes absolute freedom as a state in which all opposites are reconciled, leaving nothing outside or beyond it. In this vision, freedom is a totality that includes all contradictions and antitheses within itself. However, Jaspers also warns that this concept of absolute freedom is paradoxical and unattainable, as freedom requires opposition and limitation to exist meaningfully. Quote 150. Freedom requires that I transform whatever I am into my freedom, that I make it my fault. Jaspers suggests that true freedom involves taking full responsibility for oneself, including one's limitations and circumstances. By acknowledging these as one's own, individuals transform their existence into an expression of freedom. This means accepting the burden of self-creation, where everything that happens becomes a reflection of personal choice. Quote 151. In fact, there can be volition only if there is transcendence. Jaspers argues that the act of willing or volition is only possible when there is a connection to transcendence. Without transcendence, there would be no higher purpose or direction for the will. reducing freedom to mere indulgence or aimlessness. Transcendence gives meaning and direction to human freedom. Quote 152. Real freedom is never complete freedom. In its most radical realization, I confront its most abysmal deficiency. Jaspers highlights that no matter how free one may feel, true freedom is never fully realized. In fact, the more one experiences freedom, the more one becomes aware of its limitations and deficiencies. This awareness creates a connection to transcendence, where freedom is always imperfect but carries the possibility of deeper meaning. Quote 153. What I make of myself, I alone cannot make of myself. It is my fault, since I make it. But since I do not make it alone, this self I willed has been bestowed upon me. Jaspers explains the paradox of self-creation. While individuals are responsible for shaping their own existence, they are also influenced by forces beyond their control. This self that one creates is partly an act of will, but also something bestowed, highlighting the tension between autonomy and dependence on transcendence in the process of becoming. Quote 154. I am free to choose, but by my choice, I bind myself, carry it out, and take the consequences. Jaspers emphasizes that freedom includes the responsibility that comes with each choice. When one makes a decision, they are not only exercising freedom, but also committing themselves to the path that decision creates, along with the consequences that follow. This creates a continuous cycle where freedom and responsibility are interwoven. Quote 155. Real freedom is never complete freedom. In its most radical realization, I confront its most abysmal deficiency. Jaspers suggests that no matter how much freedom one experiences, it is always incomplete. In fact, the more one engages with freedom, the more they realize its limitations. This realization brings one closer to understanding the nature of human existence, where freedom always comes with an inherent sense of insufficiency. Quote 156. It is my own necessity, which my past actions have infused into my actions to come, a necessity which determines me like any other, except that it does so through myself. Jaspers explains how past actions shape future decisions. While external forces can influence someone's actions, the necessity imposed by one's own past choices is self-determined. This form of necessity reflects the continuous shaping of oneself through personal responsibility, as individuals are bound by the choices they have made, even as they remain free to make new ones. Quote 157. There is no freedom outside self-being. The objective world has neither a place nor a gap for it. Jaspers asserts that freedom is an internal phenomenon and cannot be found in the external objective world. The essence of freedom resides within the individual's self-being, and it is through this inner experience that one realizes true freedom. The objective world operates under laws that leave no room for the existential freedom found within the self. Quote 158. As existence, I always find myself in situations in which I act or permit myself to drift. Jaspers acknowledges that in life, individuals constantly face situations in which they either actively engage or passively let things happen. Life is full of decisions, and while one can choose to act with intention, they can also allow circumstances to take control. This highlights the tension between agency and passivity in human existence. Quote 159. Situations like the following: that I am always in situations, that I cannot live without struggling and suffering, that I cannot avoid guilt, that I must die. These are what I call boundary situations. Jaspers introduces the concept of boundary situations, which are unavoidable realities of human existence such as struggle, suffering, guilt, and death. These situations cannot be changed or escaped. They are inherent aspects of being. Instead of seeking to overcome them, one must come to terms with their inevitability. Quote 160. The meaningful way for us to react to boundary situations is not by planning and calculating to overcome them, but by the very different activity of becoming the existence we potentially are. Jaspers suggests that the proper response to boundary situations is not to try to control or eliminate them through calculation, but to use them as opportunities to realize one's true existence. This involves accepting the limitations and struggles of life, and using them to deepen one's understanding of self and existence. Quote 161, "Each form of the leap leads in boundary situations from existence to existence." Jaspers describes how individuals can transcend ordinary existence and reach a deeper state of being, or existence, through boundary situations. These moments provide the opportunity for a leap in consciousness, where one moves beyond superficial existence and embraces the full complexity of life's challenges. Quote 162, "Existential elucidation, as philosophical thought, makes room for the clear articulation of existence. Without it, existence remains obscure and uncertain." Jaspers emphasizes the role of philosophical reflection in clarifying existence. Without engaging in deep thought and reflection, one's true state of being remains vague and uncertain. Philosophical inquiry is necessary for bringing existence into clear focus, allowing individuals to gain self-awareness and understanding. Quote 163, "The unrest in this boundary situation is that what is up to me lies still ahead. My freedom in it is to assume given facts, to make them my own as if they had been my will." Jaspers explains that in boundary situations, individuals face the unknown and must deal with the tension between what they can control and what they cannot. Freedom here is not in changing the facts of the situation, but in accepting and owning them as if they were one's own choices. This ownership transforms the inevitable aspects of life into personal responsibility. Quote 164, "Particular boundary situations, death, suffering, struggle, guilt, affect each individual as general ones within his specific historicity of the moment." Jaspers acknowledges that while boundary situations like death, suffering, and guilt are universal experiences, they affect each person uniquely depending on their historical and personal context. These general challenges become deeply personal as they intersect with the individual's life, giving each person a distinctive way of relating to and understanding these existential realities. Quote 165, "Each of these definite things I face creates the situation by resisting." Jaspers notes that situations are defined by the resistance they present. Whether it's material, life, or relationships, every aspect of existence presents obstacles that shape the situation and challenge one's freedom. It is through facing and overcoming these resistances that one navigates life's complexities and exercises freedom. Quote 166, "This depth of existing existence is not simply given in historically definite situations, nor in a sense of historicity as such. To achieve it, I have to elucidate my situation existentially, as a boundary situation." Jaspers emphasizes that the depth of existence is not automatically realized in everyday situations or by merely understanding one's place in history. Instead, one must consciously engage with and elucidate these situations as boundary situations, those moments of existential confrontation that reveal the true nature of being. Quote 167, "The boundary situation of being subject to the singular constraint of my data derives its poignancy from the contrasting thought of man at large and of his due in any state of perfection." Jaspers reflects on the tension between an individual's specific, constrained situation and the broader, idealized conception of humanity. This contrast creates a poignant awareness of one's limitations within a larger, more perfect vision of existence, highlighting the struggle between reality and ideal possibilities. Quote 168, "Death as an objective fact of existence is not a boundary situation. There is no such situation for an animal, which does not know about death." Jaspers explains that death, in itself, is not a boundary situation unless it is recognized consciously. Animals, which lack awareness of death, do not experience it as an existential boundary. For humans, it is the awareness of death, the knowledge of its inevitability, that turns death into a boundary situation, where individuals must confront the limits of their existence. Quote 169. As existens, however, my sense of historicity assures me that my existence is phenomenal in time. Jaspers points out that existens recognizes itself as a phenomenon bound by time, aware that all existence is temporary. This sense of historicity allows individuals to understand that their being is not eternal, leading to a more profound engagement with life's fleeting moments and the reality of impermanence. Quote 170. The death of the closest, most beloved persons we used to communicate with is the deepest incision in phenomenal life. Jaspers describes the death of a loved one as the most profound rupture in a person's lived experience. This loss cuts deeply into the fabric of life, disrupting communication and leaving those left behind to grapple with solitude. It is a boundary situation where one must confront the finality of death and the void left by the absence of the other. Quote 171. Death has been received into my life. By realizing life the way it came to be in communication, the way it has to be now, I demonstrate the truth of a communication that will survive death. Jaspers suggests that even after the physical death of a loved one, the truth of the relationship can continue. The communication that existed in life transcends death, becoming an enduring part of one's experience. This notion transforms death from an absolute end to a moment in a continuing existential dialogue. Quote 172. Courage lies in dying truthfully, without self-deceptions. Jaspers highlights the importance of facing death with honesty and without illusions. True courage is found in accepting death as part of life, without relying on comforting but false beliefs or self-deceptions. This honest engagement with mortality allows for a deeper and more authentic relationship with existence and its inevitable end. Quote 173. Existence is the process of self-becoming, which is a struggle with myself. Jaspers explains that existence involves an ongoing inner struggle where individuals confront and shape their own potential. This process includes questioning one's identity, rejecting superficial aspects, and seeking a deeper sense of being. The struggle is essential to self-realization, as it is through this conflict that one becomes more aware of their true self. Quote 174. My existence as such deprives others, just as they deprive me. Every position I occupy excludes another, claiming some of the limited space available. Jaspers points out that existence is inherently competitive. By simply existing and taking up space, individuals limit others' opportunities, and vice versa. This natural contention is a fundamental aspect of life, where every success or advantage for one person means a loss or limitation for another, highlighting the conflict at the heart of human existence. Quote 175. There is not one lasting position on death that might be called the right one. Instead, my attitude changes desultorily as I keep regaining it throughout my life. I can say that death changes with me. Jaspers suggests that one's perspective on death is not fixed, but evolves throughout life. As individuals grow and experience life, their understanding and relationship with the concept of death shift, reflecting the personal and dynamic nature of this boundary situation. Death is not a static concept, but one that changes alongside one's existence. Quote 176. The fight stays wholly nonviolent. There is no victory or defeat for one side. Both win or lose jointly. Jaspers describes a form of existential struggle, especially in communication, where no one seeks to dominate the other. This nonviolent struggle involves mutual growth, where both parties benefit or fail together. The goal is not to defeat, but to reveal and affirm each other's existence, making the struggle a process of shared understanding rather than conflict. Quote 177. What existence and existence seek mutually, in this loving struggle in phenomenal darkness, is the source. Not the bent of an empirically existing character, supposedly discoverable as my disposition and the others, but the free decision made in the light of clear knowledge. Jaspers highlights that in the loving struggle between two individuals, they are not seeking superficial qualities or character traits, but deeper existential truths. This struggle is about reaching a free and informed decision, understanding each other at the core of their being rather than through external characteristics. It is a pursuit of existential clarity and mutual recognition. Quote 178. In every boundary situation, I have the ground pulled out from under my feet, so to speak. There is no solidly extant existence I might grasp as being. Jaspers explains that boundary situations, such as death, suffering, or guilt, remove the illusion of stability in life. These situations reveal that there is no permanent or absolute ground to stand on, and everything one might consider stable is subject to dissolution. Boundary situations force individuals to confront the fragility and uncertainty of existence. Quote 179. Freedom is tied to dependence, communication to loneliness, the sense of historicity to universal truth, and my own possible existence to the phenomenon of my empirical existence. Jaspers highlights the paradoxical nature of existence, where seemingly opposite conditions, such as freedom and dependence, are intrinsically linked. These antinomies are inescapable, and each one reveals the complexity of human life. Existential freedom, self-realization, and understanding of truth all depend on their opposites, showing that life is full of contradictions. Quote 180. The antinomical structure of existence is the boundary situation that destroys the absolute as an extant objectivity in every kind of knowledge. Jaspers argues that the antinomical nature of existence prevents the attainment of any absolute objective truth. In boundary situations, contradictions and unresolved tensions emerge, showing that no final or universal truth can be established through knowledge. Instead, understanding is always partial and relative. Quote 181. Existence is historic because it defies completion in time, because it is restlessly self-generating, because it is never in a state of harmony. Jaspers suggests that existence is inherently incomplete and constantly in flux. It never achieves a final state of harmony or resolution, as life is an ongoing process of self-creation and change. This restless quality is what defines the historicity of existence, where every moment is a step in a continuous and evolving journey. Quote 182. There is no existence without existence. Without the extant elements in all existence, the resistances and durations, there is no freedom. Jaspers emphasizes that existence, true, authentic being, cannot exist without the realities of existence, such as resistance, struggle, and time. Freedom is not a detached abstract concept, but is grounded in the practical challenges and constraints of existence. Without these elements, freedom would be meaningless. Quote 183. Absolute consciousness is not the being of existence, but its self-assurance. Not the reality proper, but its reflection. Jaspers explains that absolute consciousness is not the actual being or essence of existence itself. Instead, it serves as the self-awareness and assurance of that being. It is a reflection of existence, providing a sense of certainty about its existence, but not the essence of the reality itself. Quote 184. The paradoxical character of philosophizing, its way of saying and not saying things, the circles and the disappearances of what was meant, these indicate that the task defies fulfillment. Jaspers reflects on the inherent paradox in philosophical inquiry. Philosophizing often involves articulating ideas that are simultaneously affirmed and negated, creating a cycle of understanding and unknowing. This complexity reveals the difficulty, or even impossibility, of fully capturing the nature of absolute consciousness or ultimate truths. Quote 185. Absolute consciousness is a certainty of being whose state of tension with uncertainty makes it the source of all philosophizing. Jaspers suggests that the tension between the certainty and uncertainty of absolute consciousness is what drives the process of philosophizing. This internal conflict between knowing and not knowing fuels the desire for deeper understanding and reflection, making absolute consciousness the origin of philosophical thought. Quote 186. Existence ascertains itself by fulfilling the consciousness that awaits it, so to speak, and enables it in existence to become aware of being. Jaspers explains that existence becomes fully aware of itself by engaging with and fulfilling the consciousness that is part of its being. Through this process, existence achieves self-awareness, allowing it to recognize and affirm its own existence. This fulfillment of consciousness is key to the realization of self-being. Quote 187. Absolute consciousness is the certainty which existence has of being, not anything it knows about itself. Jaspers explains that absolute consciousness is not a form of knowledge or self-awareness in the conventional sense. Rather, it is the deep, fundamental certainty of being that existence possesses. It is not about knowing specific facts about oneself, but about having a foundational assurance of one's existence. Quote 188. I cannot conceive absolute consciousness as an object. I cannot explore it as existence. I cannot imagine that I might experience it. It is like nothing. Jaspers emphasizes that absolute consciousness is beyond comprehension in the usual sense. It cannot be treated as an object or directly experienced like other phenomena. It exists outside the realm of typical experience, making it elusive and ungraspable, akin to nothing. Quote 189. In this not knowing I come to be sure of myself when it remains inexplicable why I love and believe, why I can live even in the boundary situations. Jaspers highlights the paradox of not knowing, where individuals reach a deeper certainty of themselves despite their lack of knowledge. It is through this uncertainty, particularly in boundary situations, that one becomes sure of their core beliefs and motivations, such as love and faith, without needing clear explanations. Quote 190. Vertigo is thus an origin of philosophizing. A dizziness that just lets everything slide turbulently into chaos is nothing, of course. What is philosophical is the thoughtful vertigo. Jaspers describes the feeling of vertigo as a metaphor for the beginning of philosophical inquiry. While mindless confusion leads to chaos, the kind of vertigo that accompanies deep thought opens up new insights. This thoughtful vertigo allows individuals to see beyond conventional knowledge, pushing them toward a deeper understanding of being. Quote 191. Conscience is the voice at the turning point, which in the motion calls upon me to distinguish and to decide. Jaspers explains that conscience plays a critical role at moments of existential decision-making. It acts as an internal voice that compels individuals to make choices, particularly at key turning points in life. Conscience guides one's actions by providing the clarity needed to distinguish right from wrong. Quote 192. Love is the most incomprehensible reality of absolute consciousness because it is the most groundless and self-understood. Jaspers describes love as a central element of absolute consciousness, but one that defies explanation. It arises without any clear cause, and it is both foundational and self-evident. Love is not something that needs to be justified or explained. It simply exists as the ultimate fulfillment of being. Quote 193. Conscience remains aimless without love. Lacking love, it will lapse into empty stringency and formality. Jaspers emphasizes that conscience, when not accompanied by love, becomes rigid and formalistic. Love provides direction and meaning to conscience, allowing it to function as more than a set of strict rules. Without love, conscience loses its depth and becomes focused only on outward actions rather than the deeper truths of being. Quote 194. In love, there is exaltation and present satisfaction, motion and rest. betterment, and goodness. Jaspers highlights the paradoxical nature of love, which brings both movement and rest, striving and fulfillment. Love simultaneously pushes individuals towards self-improvement while providing a sense of contentment in the present moment. It embodies both dynamic and static elements of existence. Quote 195. Faith is love's explicit, conscious certainty of being. Grown independent, faith draws on that certainty to animate the love that engendered it. Jaspers explains that faith arises from love and serves as its conscious affirmation. Faith gives form and direction to love, turning it into an active certainty about existence. This certainty allows individuals to act with purpose and confidence, grounded in the love that generated the faith. Quote 196. Imagination as absolute consciousness is love, which in seeing things, in images and thoughts, comes to elucidate the certainty of being. Jaspers describes imagination as a form of absolute consciousness, where love expresses itself through visions and thoughts. Imagination brings clarity to the certainty of being by presenting deeper truths through creative and visionary means. It is through imagination that individuals can access the more profound realities of existence. Quote 197. Love, faith, and imagination are pure, present fulfillments of absolute consciousness. But in empirical existence, where everything we think and form in them is finite, the appearance of absolute consciousness will be disturbed. Jaspers explains that while love, faith, and imagination represent the purest expressions of absolute consciousness, they are inevitably constrained by the limits of empirical reality. As soon as they are brought into the finite world, their absolute nature becomes distorted and disturbed by the conditions of existence. Quote 198. Irony is the all-destroying view I take in thinking on grounds of my possible existence, the view which nothing can withstand that is supposed to be solidified as valid. Jaspers suggests that irony serves as a powerful tool for existence, allowing one to deconstruct and question all supposedly fixed truths. Irony reveals the inherent instability in anything that is presented as objectively valid, constantly challenging established certainties by casting doubt upon them from the perspective of existence. Quote 199. To be quite myself in the mere objectivity of an action, of anything I can know, say, or form, is an endeavor in which existence is bound to fail because of the inadequacy of any general objectivity. Jaspers emphasizes the difficulty of fully expressing one's true self, or existence, through objective actions or statements. Since objectivity is limited and rigid, it cannot capture the fullness of existence. Any attempt to express the self solely through objective means is inherently inadequate and bound to fail. Quote 200. The irony of reality, so to speak, what exists as if it were itself is sham. What does exist is what will vanish. Jaspers describes the ironic nature of reality, where what appears to be solid and real is ultimately transient and will disappear. This irony highlights the ephemeral quality of existence, reminding us that everything that seems stable is destined to fade, leaving behind only the fleeting traces of being. Quote 201. Composure as an element of absolute consciousness is tied to boundary situations. It is the calm certainty of being as an acquired background and a future possibility. Jaspers explains that true composure, in the context of absolute consciousness, is deeply connected to boundary situations, moments that confront the limits of existence. Composure is not the absence of disturbance, but the calm assurance of being, grounded in the understanding that one can endure and grow through these existential challenges. Quote 202. Man alone acts. In action, he knows his own will. Action is his activity, which he himself knows and determines. Jaspers highlights that action is unique to human beings, as only humans possess self-awareness and the ability to consciously determine their will. Through action, individuals express and understand their will, setting them apart from other living creatures whose behaviors are driven by instinct without reflection. Quote 203. Action ceases to be unconditional, however, where a man loses himself in the world. Jaspers warns that when a person becomes overly absorbed in worldly pursuits and loses sight of their deeper self, their actions can no longer be considered unconditional. Mundane purposes and goals take over, and the person becomes detached from the inner certainty that defines unconditional action. This loss of self results in actions that are no longer expressions of Quote 204. Existence. This unconditionality alone makes it understandable that men can risk their lives, that they can attach absolute importance to one purpose in the world. Jaspers explains that unconditional action allows individuals to make significant sacrifices, such as risking their lives for a higher purpose. This is because unconditionality imbues their actions with a sense of absolute importance, even in the face of mortal danger. Without this sense of transcendence, such risks would seem irrational or meaningless. Quote 205. The tension in existence, that I act as if existing reality were absolute, and am aware at the same time that as mere reality everything is nothing, this tension is the truth of unconditional action in the world. Jaspers highlights the paradox inherent in unconditional action. On one hand, individuals act with total commitment, as if reality were absolute. On the other hand, they are aware that in the grand scheme, everything is ultimately fleeting and insignificant. This tension between commitment and existential awareness is what defines the truth of unconditional action. Quote 206. Unconditional transcendent action refers directly to its otherness, which it is meant to draw into reality. Jaspers explains that unconditional transcendent action aims to bring something beyond ordinary existence, something other, into reality. This kind of action transcends worldly concerns, seeking to connect with higher, non-empirical truths or realities that cannot be fully grasped through mundane experiences. Quote 207. The three dimensions are potentially present in each unconditional act. The act participates in ideas, is carried by an existence, and relates to transcendence. Jaspers describes how each unconditional act embodies three dimensions. It engages with abstract ideas, is rooted in the individual's existence, and seeks a connection with transcendence. These dimensions interact within each act, making unconditional actions complex and deeply tied to the totality of human experience. Quote 208. Unconditional acts break through existence, and yet they cannot for an instant do without it. Jaspers points out the paradox of unconditional action. Although such acts aim to transcend worldly existence, they are still dependent on existence for their realization. This tension between transcending and being rooted in existence is at the core of unconditional acts, which both challenge and rely on the world they seek to surpass. Quote 209. Suicide is one single act that frees us from all further action. Death, a crucial boundary situation for existence, is an event that comes. It is not summoned. Jaspers reflects on the nature of suicide, noting that it is a singular act that removes the possibility of further action. While death as a boundary situation is inevitable, suicide is a choice made within human freedom, making it a unique confrontation with the limits of existence. Quote 210. All acts in boundary situations are meant to concern the human self so directly that no other person can contribute to the decision. Jaspers explains that actions in boundary situations are deeply personal and affect the core of an individual's being. These actions are so intimate and significant that they cannot be influenced or decided by anyone else. The decisions made in such situations are uniquely tied to one's existence and cannot be shared or fully communicated with others. Quote 211. No one can be advised or persuaded to be unconditional. No one can consult others about unconditional acts, asking them whether or not to do it. Jaspers emphasizes the solitude involved in making unconditional decisions. Such actions arise from a deep personal place and cannot be based on advice or persuasion from others. Unconditional acts are a matter of personal conviction and must come from within, without external validation or input. Quote 2-12. The absolutely lonely man is beyond help, and unconditional negativity with suicidal results means isolation. Thus, there is a chance of rescue if communication succeeds. Jaspers points out the profound loneliness experienced by those contemplating unconditional actions, particularly suicide. This isolation makes them difficult to reach, but if genuine communication can be established, there is a possibility of saving them from their despair. Communication can provide a lifeline by re-establishing connections with others. Quote 2-13. To declare an unconditional act as intended robs it of its unconditionality. Jaspers argues that when a person announces their intention to perform an unconditional act, such as suicide, it loses its pure, unconditional nature. By turning the act into something that can be debated or discussed, its original existential significance is diminished, making it a conditioned rather than unconditional act. Quote 2-14. Possible existence will indeed shudder at his lack of faith, his loneliness, his rupture of all communication. What seemed possible only as a boundary has become real. Jaspers reflects on how the death of someone through suicide forces others to confront the existential reality of boundary situations. What was once only a possibility, a rupture in communication and faith, becomes a devastating reality, shaking those left behind and confronting them with the harsh truth of the existential void. Quote 2-15. Unconditional existential action is identical with the ideal one as far as this goes, but it can break through the idea. Jaspers explains that while unconditional existential action aligns with the concept of ideal action, it has the potential to transcend and surpass it. Unconditional action is not confined to predefined ideas or principles, but can break free from them to address deeper existential needs that go beyond mere ideals. Quote 2-16. In unconditional action, both drive and reflection are illuminated by an assurance of being which does not lie either in the drive and its satisfaction or in the calculated end. Jaspers emphasizes that unconditional action is motivated by a profound inner assurance of being. This assurance transcends mere desires or rational calculations, offering a deeper sense of purpose. Such action is driven not by external results or personal satisfaction, but by a connection to one's core existence. Quote 217. The law is like the stimulus on which I prove myself. It stimulates by tempting me to transgress it simply because it is a law, and it stimulates by luring me to throw away my freedom in blind submission. Jaspers reflects on the dual nature of law as both a challenge and a temptation. The existence of laws provokes individuals to either break them in defiance or to submit to them unquestioningly, risking the loss of freedom. This tension allows individuals to confront the true meaning of their actions, whether through resistance or obedience. Quote 2-18. Possible existence anticipates as certain what the objective thinking of consciousness at large cannot lay down without penalty. Jaspers suggests that existence, or authentic being, perceives certain truths that cannot be fully articulated by objective, rational thinking. These existential truths are understood intuitively, while purely rational consciousness struggles to grasp them without facing contradictions or limitations. Existence bridges this gap by embracing uncertainty. Quote 219. Only against both stimuli of the law can I gain the full assurance of unconditional self-being. Jaspers explains that one must confront both the temptation to defy the law and the lure of blind obedience in order to fully realize unconditional self-being. It is by navigating between these extremes that individuals can achieve true existential freedom, affirming their own identity through conscious and deliberate action. Quote 220. Existence cannot be realized as a mere object in the world. It can only be found in the act of self-being. Jaspers emphasizes that existence is not something that can be treated as an external object or phenomenon. It is only through the act of self-being, through conscious engagement with one's existence, that existence is realized. This underscores the personal internal nature of existence, which cannot be objectified or externalized. Quote 221. The law tempts me, drawing me to either break it in rebellion or submit to it without reflection. Jaspers explores the dual influence of the law, which provokes individuals to either challenge it or follow it blindly. The presence of laws creates tension between defiance and submission, pushing individuals to examine their relationship with authority and freedom. It is through this struggle that existential decisions are made. Quote 222. True unconditionality lies in transcending all ends and purposes of action, where the action itself becomes an expression of freedom. Jaspers explains that unconditionality in action is not tied to achieving specific goals or outcomes. Instead, it involves acting purely as an expression of freedom. Such actions transcend practical purposes and reflect the deeper freedom of existence, where the meaning of the act lies in the act itself rather than in its results. Quote 223. Unconditional acts grow lucid in the communication that transcends all mere community of interests and deceptive kinship of character. Jaspers suggests that unconditional acts achieve clarity through genuine communication, which goes beyond superficial connections or shared interests. True communication is essential for understanding the deeper meaning of unconditional actions, allowing individuals to engage with each other on an existential level, rather than through commonalities alone. Quote 224. In existential action, I affirm myself not through calculated outcomes, but by the very fact that I choose to act unconditionally. Jaspers emphasizes that in existential action, the affirmation of the self comes not from the success or failure of the action, but from the decision to act unconditionally. This choice itself is a statement of one's existence, showing a commitment to authenticity and freedom regardless of the consequences. Quote 225. Existence is always both subjective and objective. To itself, it appears only in the world, which is split into subject and object. In other words, in the interrelation of both. Jaspers emphasizes that existence cannot be fully understood as purely subjective or objective. It exists in the interplay between the two, where the self sees itself through both subjective experiences and objective reality. This dynamic tension between subjectivity and objectivity is central to the understanding of human existence. Quote 226. To preserve the truth of the philosophical elucidation of existence, we must explicitly adopt the significance of objectivity. Jaspers stresses the importance of objectivity in philosophical discussions of existence. While existence is deeply subjective, engaging with objectivity ensures that philosophical inquiry remains grounded and avoids dissolving into mere subjectivity. The balance between subjectivity and objectivity preserves the depth of existential reflection. Quote 227. As existence, I must necessarily keep retrieving myself from the plunge. I cannot help having to live in time as possible existence, on the brink of lapsing into objectivity or into subjectivity. Jaspers explains that existence constantly navigates the risk of falling too far into either objectivity or subjectivity. Human existence requires continuous effort to maintain this balance, as neither extreme can fully capture the true nature of being. This tension is an ongoing part of living as existence. Quote 228. Objectivity not only makes the subject aware of itself, it also offers a challenge. Objective is, second, what is valid, not unthought of in the blind melee of an existence. Jaspers points out that objectivity serves as more than just a reflection of the self. It provides a challenge by presenting something external and valid, outside the subjective realm. Objectivity offers a framework for understanding existence beyond personal thoughts and emotions, demanding engagement with broader realities. Quote 229. In time, it must yield inevitably to new tensions. Jaspers suggests that any temporary harmony between subjectivity and objectivity will eventually give way to new tensions. This ongoing shift between balance and tension reflects the dynamic nature of existence, where no resolution is permanent, and the process of navigating between subject and object is continuous. Quote 230. The interrelation of the objective and the subjective becomes a momentary unity that fulfills me as present happiness. But this fulfillment is not going to last. In time, it must yield inevitably to new tensions. Jaspers explains that while moments of harmony between subjectivity and objectivity can bring a sense of fulfillment, this state is always temporary. Over time, new tensions will arise, as the dynamic between these two poles constantly shifts. This continuous tension is an inherent part of existence, where stability is fleeting, and balance must always be renegotiated. Quote 231. Objectivity not only makes the subject aware of itself, it also offers a challenge. Objective is, second, what is valid, not unthought of in the blind melee of existence. Jaspers highlights that objectivity does more than simply reflect the self. It challenges individuals by presenting external truths and values that demand recognition and engagement. Objective reality requires individuals to think critically, rather than passively accepting existence without reflection. This challenge pushes existence to engage deeply with the world. Quote 232. There is no such I that cannot find its way back to the real outside world. Wherever there is an I, there are objects for it. Jaspers refutes the idea of a purely subjective existence detached from the external world. He argues that subjectivity and objectivity are inseparable. Wherever there is a self-aware I, it is always in relation to objects and the external world. The self is not isolated, but engaged with reality, constantly interacting with it. Quote 233. Existence is not purely and simply creative. It does not make something out of nothing. In what appears as creation, rather, existence takes hold of something which is objective for the existence and makes it aware of itself. Jaspers explains that existence does not create reality from nothing. Instead, it engages with the objective world to realize its potential. Through interacting with external reality, existence gains self-awareness and becomes more fully realized. This process of creation is not independent, but deeply intertwined with objectivity. Quote 234. The polarity of subjectivity and objectivity is not a harmonious unity, but a tension in which existence must constantly move between both poles to avoid decline. Jaspers emphasizes that existence cannot rest in either pure subjectivity or pure objectivity. Instead, it must constantly navigate the tension between the two to avoid becoming stagnant. This movement between subjectivity and objectivity is a defining feature of existence, requiring continuous effort to maintain balance and authenticity. Quote 235. Existence cannot find its way back to the real outside world as a purely subjective entity. There is no I without the objects of the world. Jaspers emphasizes that existence cannot exist in isolation as a purely subjective experience. It must always be in relation to the external world and the objects within it. The self is not detached from reality, but deeply connected to the world through its interaction with objects, highlighting the inseparability of subjectivity and objectivity. Quote 236. What is purely objective is as unexistential as that which is purely subjective. Jaspers asserts that neither pure objectivity nor pure subjectivity can fully capture existence. If something is entirely objective, it lacks the personal existential depth required for true understanding. Similarly, pure subjectivity Being detached from reality also fails to reflect the totality of human existence. Existence must navigate between these extremes. Quote 237. Subjectivity itself requires objectification. Jaspers explains that subjectivity cannot remain purely internal or abstract. It must manifest in some objective form. Human experience, feelings, and thoughts need to be externalized and made concrete to be fully understood and communicated. This process of objectifying subjectivity is essential for existence to realize its potential. Quote 238. A solidification of objectivity will destroy existence. Jaspers warns that when objectivity becomes too rigid, it stifles existence. If individuals blindly submit to objectivity without engaging with it critically, they lose their personal freedom and capacity for existential growth. Existence requires fluidity and the ability to challenge objectivity to avoid being diminished by it. Quote 239. The polarity of subjectivity and objectivity must always be in motion, as existence requires constant navigation between both to avoid decline. Jaspers emphasizes that existence cannot rest in either subjectivity or objectivity. It must constantly shift between the two to maintain its vitality. If existence becomes fixed in one pole, whether subjective or objective, it risks stagnation or dissolution. This continuous movement is essential for the dynamic nature of human existence. Quote 240. Though self-assured, existence as temporal existence finds itself somehow broken, as if a preceding perfection had been lost, now to be sought again, but never attained. Jaspers explains that while existence may feel confident in its being, it still experiences a sense of incompleteness or brokenness in temporal existence. This imperfection suggests a longing for a lost state of wholeness that can never be fully reclaimed, leaving existence in a constant state of seeking without ever achieving ultimate perfection. Quote 241. Since an existing existence remains in the dichotomy of subjectivity and objectivity, and since the inadequacy that prevails between its subjectivity and its objectivity is insurmountable, there is no form in which existence can be perfected. Jaspers emphasizes that existence is inherently divided between subjectivity and objectivity, and this division is impossible to fully reconcile. Because of this unresolved tension, there is no way for existence to reach a state of perfection. The dichotomy between these two modes of being is a permanent feature of human existence. Quote 242. In existence, there is the choice only between a tensionless sinking of existence and its tension-rich, never definitive realization in subjectivity and objectivity. Jaspers explains that existence faces two paths: one of passive decline, where it loses tension and vitality, or one of ongoing struggle and tension between subjectivity and objectivity. The latter path is full of difficulties, but it is also where existence can continue to seek its realization, even though this realization is never final or complete. Quote 243. The ultimate substance of existential reality is thus never sufficiently comprehensible by its effectiveness and success in the world, or by the permanence of its achievements. It can be understood only in relation to its transcendence. Jaspers points out that the true nature of existence cannot be measured by worldly success or lasting achievements. Instead, it can only be fully understood in relation to its connection with transcendence, which lies beyond empirical reality. This highlights the spiritual or metaphysical dimension of existence that transcends material accomplishments. Quote 244. For philosophizing, the possibility of a solution will be positively realized as the question of subjectivity and objectivity is overcome by elucidating the original being of existence with other existence, a being from which no man can any longer step back for an objective survey. Jaspers suggests that the true resolution to the tension between subjectivity and objectivity comes through a deeper exploration of existence in relation to other existence. This kind of existential understanding cannot be reduced to objective analysis, as it involves a shared, lived experience that transcends mere observation. Quote 245. The forms of objectivity as such are the inexhaustible topic of world orientation in the special sciences. The philosophical question is what existential relevance these forms may have. Jaspers emphasizes that while objectivity is central to the study of the sciences, philosophy seeks to understand its deeper existential relevance. The question goes beyond merely understanding objectivity in the empirical sense, asking how these forms affect human existence and the choices individuals make within the world. Quote 246. A man's detachment from all finite things makes even the future relative for him, as something finite. The road to eternity crosses the path of existence. Jaspers suggests that detachment from worldly concerns leads to a perspective where even the future is seen as finite. In this detachment, one can glimpse the eternal, which transcends the temporal concerns of existence. The path to transcendence intersects with the finite reality of human life, giving existence a deeper dimension beyond temporal limitations. Quote 247. State, religion, and culture are in coalition only. In sociological world orientation we see, endlessly interrelated and intertwined, what can be objectively determined about them. But only the existence of the individuals who join in it can grasp the coalition. Jaspers points out that state, religion, and culture are closely linked, but only become fully meaningful through the existence of individuals. While these concepts can be studied objectively, their existential significance comes from the way individuals engage with them, making them real and vibrant through personal participation. Quote 248. What has objectivity will remain general, however. Self-being as such is without objectivity. It is not objective until it enters into the universal and is brought to itself by the tension between it and the universal. Jaspers reiterates that self-being is inherently subjective and gains objectivity only when it engages with universal truths. The tension between personal experience and universal forms allows existence to become grounded in objective reality, transforming it from a purely subjective state to one that participates in the larger world. Quote 249. Self-being is vigorous only to the extent to which it is capable of integrating itself in something objective without being destroyed, of subordinating itself to the point of conscious obedience in regard to finite ends without abandoning its freedom of autonomous choice in the absolute realm. Jaspers emphasizes that self-being must engage with objective reality in order to remain strong. This involves balancing obedience to finite worldly goals while still maintaining autonomy in the absolute existential realm. True self-being requires both a grounding in objectivity and a commitment to existential freedom. Quote 250. The state is the objectivity that lets me participate in the real fate of mankind. Its existential import lies in my choice to participate or not to participate. Jaspers explains that the state serves as an objective structure that connects individuals to the collective fate of humanity. The existential significance of the state is determined by whether an individual chooses to engage with it and accept responsibility for its outcomes or opts for detachment and disengagement. Quote 251. Engagement. Existence is not objective until it enters into the universal and is brought to itself by the tension between it and the universal. This is how it comes to be, by growing into objectivities. Jaspers suggests that existence cannot fully realize itself without engaging with universal objective realities. It is through this interaction with objectivity that existence becomes fully conscious of itself. The tension between personal subjectivity and universal objectivity is essential to the development of existence. Quote 252. The unconditional ought comes from the autonomy of a free existence that hears itself and thus relates to its transcendence. Jaspers explains that the ought of ethical action comes from the internal autonomy of existence. This inner voice, which guides ethical decisions, is linked to the individual's relationship with transcendence. The ought is not externally imposed, but emerges from a deep connection with one's own existential truth. Quote 253. Moral tenets are thus far from unequivocal. There is no simple, direct, rational way to subsume things under them. They require interpretation, not only by objective considerations, as do legal tenets, but by an echo in the freely transforming subjectivity. Jaspers points out that moral tenets are not as straightforward as legal rules. They cannot be applied universally without interpretation, as they depend on subjective understanding. The existential relevance of moral tenets comes from how individuals relate to and interpret them, making their application more complex than legal dictates. Quote 254. Human beings exist only in society. It is the material premise on which every individual has come to be. Jaspers explains that human existence is fundamentally tied to society. No individual can exist independently of the social structures and traditions that shape their life. Society provides the necessary conditions for an individual's development and remains an essential part of their being, even in isolation. Quote 255. Society is objective in the given institutions of a time, in professions and functions, in the state, in the obligations that govern human conduct. Jaspers emphasizes that society is composed of objective structures, such as institutions, professions, and the state, which shape and regulate human behavior. These societal elements exist independently of individual subjectivity, providing a framework for action and existence within a larger, structured reality. Quote 256. The objectivity of society is the all-encompassing reality of the existing human world. Potentially, I can step out of it, and if I go in for its objectification and exploration, it is no more than an objectivity. Jaspers highlights that society represents the total reality of the human world. While individuals can distance themselves from society and analyze it objectively, they cannot completely escape its influence. Society remains both an objective reality to be understood and a space where individuals live and interact. Quote 257. The will to rule results from my own failure and from the failure of others. It is the inescapable factor without which human existence would indeed be impossible. Jaspers suggests that the drive for power and control arises from personal and collective failures. This will to rule is a necessary element of human existence, as it creates the order and structure required to prevent chaos and maintain society. Without this will, human existence would dissolve into conflict and disorder. Quote 258. Property ties in with hatred and envy, with fear for its protection, with arrogance in some, and impotence in others. Jaspers notes that the concept of property generates strong emotions and social tensions. Property ownership is often accompanied by negative feelings, such as envy, fear, arrogance, and impotence, reflecting the inequality and conflict that arise from the possession and distribution of material resources in society. Quote 259. The claims of the objectivity of property, however, are to let it serve the sole point of existence, which is to bring forth the highest human potential. Jaspers argues that the ultimate purpose of property is not merely to provide material wealth, but to serve the realization of human potential. Property should be used as a means for individuals to develop and fulfill their existence, contributing to their personal growth and the betterment of society. Quote 260. The objectivity of society is not truth, because it is extant. It becomes truth only by satisfying the subjectivity that finds itself in it. Jaspers explains that societal structures, though they exist as objective realities, do not hold inherent truth simply by existing. These structures become meaningful only when individuals subjectively engage with and find personal significance in them. The interaction between the individual's inner reality and the external world determines the truth within social systems. Quote 261. To become a fulfilled self-being, the individual must indeed be part of the society that makes him identical with an idea, but he must also preserve his socially indissoluble independence. Jaspers highlights the dual nature of self-being, where individuals must participate in societal structures to realize certain ideals while also maintaining their independence. True fulfillment comes from balancing these external commitments with an inner sense of autonomy, ensuring that the self is not entirely subsumed by societal demands. Quote 162. Charity is helpful action pursuant to general categories, blind to human peculiarities, measuring, weighing, and judging by moral generalities. It is loveless. Jaspers distinguishes charity from true love by pointing out that charity, when based on impersonal and generalized rules, lacks the emotional depth and personal connection of love. True love involves recognizing and responding to the unique qualities of the individual, while charity often operates on a more detached and systematic level. Quote 263. The social objectivity of charity takes two roads. As an ecclesiastic reality, it remains charity in the proper sense of the word, as flowing from a solidarity of all men. As a governmental reality, it becomes an organization of rights and duties. Jaspers explains that charity, when institutionalized, takes two different forms. In religious contexts, it maintains its original meaning of solidarity and human connection, while in governmental systems, it becomes a bureaucratic mechanism focused on rights and responsibilities. The personal, heartfelt nature of charity is often lost in the transition to state-controlled aid. Quote 264. The objectivity of aid given by welfare and social insurance agencies becomes soulless, a function of bureaucracy and of its mechanisms. It has lost its reference to original neighborly love. Jaspers criticizes the depersonalization of charity within bureaucratic systems. When aid is reduced to a function of government mechanisms, it loses its human element and becomes disconnected from the sense of neighborly love and personal connection that originally defined acts of help and compassion. Quote 265. Existence respects an otherness which it needs at the same time, needs as resistance, as a chance to prove itself, and as the peril of temptation. Jaspers emphasizes that existence requires opposition or otherness to fully realize itself. This otherness serves as a challenge and an opportunity for existence to assert itself and prove its freedom. Without resistance, existence would lack the tension necessary for its growth and realization. Quote 266. The objectivity of society is historic, for each present order of human existence applies as an objective one to this time only. It is not objectively right and timelessly valid. Jaspers argues that the social structures of a given time are not eternal truths. The objectivity of society is bound to the historical moment and cannot claim timeless validity. This historic nature of societal forms means they are subject to change and reinterpretation as time progresses. Quote 267. Existence alone can see the historicity of the objectivity that encompasses it. It can see that it is this historicity which makes it an eternal being within temporal phenomenality. Jaspers explains that only existence is capable of perceiving the historical nature of the objective world. This understanding allows existence to recognize its place as an eternal being within the temporal world, giving deeper meaning to its actions and decisions in relation to history and transcendence. Quote 268. Existence affirms the existence of institutions because they are indispensable to it. As temporal existence, it cannot come to be without them. Jaspers explains that existence depends on institutions as they provide the structure necessary for temporal existence. While individuals may critique or resist institutional constraints, they are still necessary for the development and realization of human potential within the world. Institutions offer the framework through which individuals navigate and express their freedom. Quote 269. Tradition forms and unintentionally fulfills the new generation in childhood. It is made conscious later, by an inner relation to history as our heritage. Jaspers describes how tradition shapes individuals from an early age, even before they are fully aware of it. As people grow and mature, they become conscious of this tradition and its impact on their identity. This relationship with history becomes an essential part of understanding oneself and one's place in the world. Quote 270. What every man potentially is, and what is crucial, in fact, if I was struck by the greatness of historical figures, this can be lost if it is made absolute. Jaspers warns that idealizing historical figures or human greatness can lead to a distortion of one's own potential. If greatness is made into something absolute, it can overshadow individual growth and personal achievements. Existence thrives on the recognition of one's own possibilities, not on idolizing others to the point of self-neglect. Quote 271. Poise, humanitas, and passion must be borne by existence if they are to be possible truths. Jaspers stresses that qualities like poise, humanitas, humaneness, and passion must be integrated into one's existence to hold meaning. These traits are not static, but must be lived and expressed through existential decisions. Poise and humaneness provide balance, while passion drives action, all contributing to a well-rounded, authentic existence. Quote 272. Existence is not in the sense in which objects are, nor is it in the sense of the being of subjects accessible to psychology. Jaspers emphasizes that existence cannot be understood in the same way as physical objects or psychological subjects. It exists beyond objective and subjective categorizations, indicating a deeper, more elusive form of being that transcends these common frameworks. Existence cannot be fully grasped by empirical science or psychological analysis. Quote 273. The sense of being of possible existence is not an observable phenomenon. It does not exist except for this existence and the one linked with it in communication. Jaspers highlights that the awareness of existence is not something that can be directly observed or measured. It only exists in the context of individual existence and its communication with another existence. This mutual recognition and communication create the unique sense of being that defines existence. Quote 274. Truths conflict, but they are not shared by one who knows them all. They are shared by him who is identical with one of them. Jaspers reflects on the nature of truth in relation to existence, stating that while different truths may conflict, they are not universally accessible or shared by everyone. Instead, truths are internalized by those who identify with them, creating a personal and unique relationship with one's own truth. Quote 275. My truth, which as existence I am simply in my freedom, comes up against other existential truth. By and with this, it comes to be itself. Jaspers asserts that an individual's truth as existence is formed through interaction with other existential truths. It is not created in isolation, but shaped through the encounter with other beings. This confrontation allows existence to fully realize itself in relation to others, emphasizing the interdependence of truths. Quote 276. Existence in the plural is not to be contemplated as an objectivity, nor as a subjectivity. We cannot establish it as extant, nor can we count how many of it there may be. Jaspers explains that multiple existence cannot be understood through the usual categories of objectivity or subjectivity. Unlike objects or subjects that can be quantified or measured, existence in the plural form resists such classification. Existence exists in its interactions with other existence, beyond simple counting or observation. Quote 277. I cannot step out of this truth. I cannot watch it, and I cannot know it. Jaspers stresses that existential truth is something one cannot objectively observe or analyze from the outside. It is lived and experienced from within, making it impossible to step outside of one's own truth to view it impartially. This truth is deeply personal and inseparable from one's existence. Quote 278. The truth of existence is not manifold because it cannot be seen as manifold from outside, and not established as extant. Jaspers argues that the truth of existence is not something that can be fragmented or divided into multiple parts. From an external perspective, one might think there are many truths, but for existence, truth is singular and cannot be objectively proven or established as an observable reality. Quote 279. Existence is accordingly multiple, but not countable. Jaspers points out that while existence exists in many forms through interactions with other existence, it cannot be counted or quantified like objects in the world. The multiplicity of existence is a qualitative, relational experience rather than a numerical or objective phenomenon. Quote 280. There must be an existence to apperceive reality proper. What reality is, however, is thus neither defined nor identical for all men. Jaspers highlights that reality is not something that is universally the same for everyone. The perception of reality depends on the individual existence that experiences it. Each person's experience of reality is shaped by their own unique relationship to transcendence and their personal context. Quote 281. Existence is always the same thing in another form. Not until I transcend and extinguish the historical side will a contemplation of history lead to the sense of historicity that assures me of being. Jaspers explains that existence, while it may take different forms over time, remains essentially the same. To fully understand it, one must transcend the historical details and look beyond them to the underlying sense of being. It is through this transcendence that individuals can connect with the timeless aspect of their own existence. Quote 282. I cannot step out of existence. I cannot watch it, cannot compare it with other existence, cannot objectively put several of it side by side. Jaspers highlights the inability to objectively compare or observe existence from an external viewpoint. Existence can only be experienced from within, making it impossible to step outside of it and treat it as an object that can be measured or compared. It is a lived internal reality that defies external evaluation. Quote 283. In diversity, we seek the unity which, if it could last, would be the end of diversity. But existence, at once subjective and objective, can see only a signpost pointing to realization in the one being for all. Jaspers reflects on the human desire for unity amidst diversity, suggesting that while unity is sought, it can never be fully achieved. Existence, which encompasses both subjectivity and objectivity, recognizes that unity is more of a goal to strive for rather than a final state to be reached. It remains an ideal rather than a reality. Quote 284. Faith against faith. In faith I collide as truth. As the truth I am as myself, with the faith in other truth. It takes this collision for my faith to come into being, and for me to come to myself. Jaspers emphasizes that an individual's faith is not fully realized until it encounters and confronts the faith of another. This clash between different truths is essential for personal growth, as it forces individuals to reflect on their own beliefs and solidifies their sense of self. Faith emerges not in isolation, but through the tension and dialogue with other perspectives. Quote 285. Only the man who becomes aware of the faith that is inherent in his existence, who can distinguish it from cogent and objective knowledge, as well as from the other faith. Only such a man is originally unconditional and in true peril. Jaspers explains that true existential faith is distinct from objective knowledge or beliefs imposed by others. The person who realizes the inherent faith within their existence, and who recognizes it as separate from external truths, lives in a state of freedom but also vulnerability. This person faces the challenge of holding their own faith without succumbing to outside pressures. Quote 286. The struggle for existence, of whichever kind, occurs in the world as passive happening and active doing. It does not become a medium of existential struggle until the objectively incomprehensible dichotomy sets in. Jaspers highlights that the mere act of living and struggling for survival does not qualify as an existential struggle. It is only when individuals confront the deeper, paradoxical conflicts of existence, those that cannot be fully understood or resolved through objective reasoning, that the true existential struggle begins. This struggle forces individuals to face the complexity of their being. Quote 287. Tolerance springs from a willingness to acknowledge others in communicative struggle. It makes me admit that what I am fighting against has a right to exist. The point of it is finally to end the struggle. Jaspers describes tolerance as the recognition that opposing perspectives have a legitimate place in the world. Tolerance is not passive indifference, but an active engagement that seeks to understand and respect the other, with the ultimate goal of resolving conflict through communication and mutual respect. Quote 288. In the struggle of faiths lies a solidarity that may suddenly break through and end the struggle. Jaspers suggests that even in the midst of conflict between different faiths or perspectives, there exists a possibility for solidarity. This shared struggle can lead to moments of mutual understanding or connection that transcend the immediate conflict, revealing a deeper bond between individuals who were once opposed. Philosophy, Volume 2 by Karl Jaspers, leaves readers with an understanding that true existential knowledge lies in our engagement with life's inherent tensions, where freedom, communication, and self-awareness intersect. Through his exploration of existence, Jaspers underscores that human experience is marked by the perpetual balance between autonomy and connection, personal truth, and shared reality. His work suggests that authentic selfhood emerges not in isolation, but in meaningful interactions and moments of existential choice. Ultimately, Jaspers invites readers to embrace philosophy as a way to live genuinely and thoughtfully, in the face of life's inherent ambiguities, a practice that remains vital for both personal and philosophical growth.
Curious to dive into the mind of Karl Jaspers? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of Philosophy, Volume 2, in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.